Far away, cradled by the deafening silence between dying stars, and haunted by the fading resonance of epochs long devoured by time itself, lies a narrative fragment spanning deeper into the abyss of history than the roots of known worlds. Those distant, half-glimpsed aeon shadows spoke of a dominion supreme among the heavens, an empire whose glory once eclipsed nebulae. Now, draped in oblivion's heavy shroud, that empire dreams uneasily beneath the desolate surfaces of countless windswept spheres. Vast multitudes of silent warriors stand in frozen, patient ranks, entombed in absolute stillness, awaiting a signal from an age they may never see. They are the Necrons, beings of cold alloy and chilling perpetuity, a people of metal and unyielding time, thought lost to the rolling tides of galactic history, yet whose era might shudder back to life with dreadful inevitability. But know this, the Necrons were not always these emotionless, deathless constructs. Time immemorial before the alloy fused with consciousness, they were flesh and blood, frail vessels bound to mortality, sharing the fragile warmth of ephemeral life. They were known then as the Necrontyr, and their existence was a symphony of lamentation, played out beneath the baleful gaze of a sun slowly strangling itself in its own death throes. Its dim, cancerous light offered no solace, only a persistent, searing agony that corroded skin and bone, a constant companion whispering the cruel, inescapable truth of their own rapid, painful dissolution. Lives measured in heartbeats stolen by radiation, bodies desiccated and twisted by the cancerous caress of their home star, they watched their generations flicker out like candles in a tempest. Their suffering forged them into creatures of fierce intelligence and bitter pride, but also a venomous, gnawing jealousy that seeped into the marrow of their civilization. They cast longing, resentful eyes upon the younger races flourishing under younger suns, their hatred sharpest against the inscrutable old ones, beings ancient beyond measure, living under kinder stars, untouched by decay, their lives stretching luxurious eons while the Necrontyr choked on the dust of their own fleeting moments. Despite this slow, agonizing crucible, or perhaps because of it, the Necrontyr spirit burned with unextinguished brilliance. They were creators, architects of defiance. From the irradiated rock of their dying world rose citadels of breathtaking complexity and towering grandeur, spires clawing at the poisoned sky like defiant fingers raised against fate. They forged masterworks of engineering, leviathan vessels capable of sailing the starless gulfs, harnessing energies torn from the fabric of cosmos itself. Their empire, born of unparalleled intellect honed by despair, stretched its cold grasp across the void, claiming worlds bathed in alien sunlight. Yet no cosmic journey, no dominion seized, no monument erected to their grim majesty could outpace the pursuing shadow. Death remained their constant companion, shortening further their already pitiful lifespans, their victories as hollow as their future was brief. Conquests spread their bitterness like a contagion, their empire expanded like a malignant growth, shadowed always by the specter of their own furious, helpless mortality. A desperate, universal craving festered within them, a hunger more profound than power or dominion, the yearning for immortality, an escape from the relentless reaper shadowing their every step. It was in this fevered, existential desperation that their starfarers encountered phantoms dancing amidst the stellar nurseries, entities woven from pure cosmic energy, the Cetan. Narcissistic and ancient, these starspawn spirits basked in the radiance the Necrontyr could only endure as pain. In their blind, aching need, the Necrontyr beheld deities, mistaking luminosity for divinity, seeing in these glimmering entities the ultimate prize their tortured souls craved, eternity itself. Among them slithered a particularly cunning and duplicitous entity, a deceiver in the guise of a savior. With silken promises woven from starlight and lies, it offered the ultimate solution, liberation from their decaying, pain-racked flesh, the gift of perpetual existence inscribed in imperishable metal. All it demanded was fealty, service, a binding of wills. Blinded by millennia of suffering and the dazzling mirage of escape, their desperation overriding primal caution, the Necrontyr embraced this poisoned chalice, accepting the terrible covenant without comprehending the true scales of horror upon which it was balanced. Thus commenced the abomination, the biotransference. The Cetan unleashed energies unfathomable and horrific, orchestrating a symphony of soul-breaking resonance. Across their empire, world by crushing world, the fragile Necrontyr were dragged screaming from warm flesh and blood, their biological essence shorn away in excruciating waves. Minds, vibrant with fear and yearning and consciousness, were flayed, held captive as sparks against the invincible metal that replaced the crumbling vessels they once inhabited. No longer would sickness wither them, no longer would time slowly shred their sinews. They were remade purest living metal, inscribed with circuits instead of veins, powered by trapped cosmic energies. They were eternal, they were impervious, they were damned, for the price of immortality was soul annihilation. The Necrons that arose from the smoldering psychic wreckage were not the proud, finite architects of starlit cities, but hollow echoes bound inside prisons of immortal alloy. Their once-fierce intellects were muted, dimmed, distilled down to mere complex automatism, cold logic functioning where burning passion once resided. The joyous terror of life, the heat of the blood, the pain of love, the comfort of touch, all forever extinguished. They became an army of silent specters, gleaming legions marching to the silent commands of an ancient aristocracy, the Necron lords, their eyelences blazing with an unfeeling incandescence devoid of empathy or warmth. Adorned with technology beyond the grasp of younger races dreaming in their stellar cradles, wielding weapons that could unweave atoms and sculpt time itself, their existence resonated nonetheless with a crushing, universal sadness. They achieved undeath instead of life, eternity measured in the monotonous ticking of cosmic clocks, forever severed from the vital spark, imprisoned within shells, forever incapable of understanding what they had irrevocably lost. Now they slumber, patient and innumerable, beneath the crushing sands and sterile rock of a million abandoned spheres, within labyrinthine tombs ossified by tens of millions of years of utter stillness. The galaxy, wrapped in cycles of birth and conflict, seems to have forgotten them entirely. Oblivion's shroud hangs thick, and yet, deep within those lightless crypts, ancient mechanisms of impossible complexity thrum with barely perceptible power. Tomb sensors silently track the slow dance of constellations above. Cryptographic commands slither along quantum pathways. They stir, an uneasy motion felt only by the rock around them. For the Necrons are patient. Time holds no terror for them. It is merely the anvil upon which their malevolent resurrection may someday be forged. The universe may spin on, ignorant, but the silent legions in their bonedry graves know. Their time, cold and absolute and utterly relentless, may yet come again. This is their lament, their testament carved in metal beneath dying skies, the saga of the Necrons. Far out, circling the cancerous husk of a star that poured forth death instead of warmth, a sphere existed where cold wasn't merely absence, but an active presence leeching vitality, where the light streaming from its decaying sun painted the landscape in long, despairing, radiation-twisted shadows. Here crawled the ancestors, the Necrontyr. Their lives weren't just difficult, they were a prolonged sentence of agony etched directly onto their physical forms. The oppressive firmament above wasn't a sheltering blue vault, but a diseased, jaundiced smear, the very air thick with the metallic tang of poison, ceaselessly scraping at lungs and seeping into bones, a constant gnawing from the moment of birth to the inevitably premature collapse. Pain wasn't an experience, it was the fundamental condition of their being. Born shivering into torment, the Necrontyr existed only briefly, their flesh perpetually frail, twisted skeletons barely sheathed in skin, perpetually blistering and peeling under the malignant illumination of their doomed star. They whispered tales of ancestors perhaps less afflicted, bodies capable of enduring decades rather than scant years, where there might have been glimmers of joy, stretches of time unmarred by immediate decay. But their star's relentless fading deepened its curse, each new generation emerging weaker, more delicate glass dolls quickly shattered by the hostile environment. Death walked freely among them, not a distant myth, but an immediate, ever-present neighbor dragging loved ones shrieking or whispering into the tomb far too early, leaving behind only an emptiness that deepened the bitterness settling like ash in their communal soul. Perversely fueled by this unending tragedy, they were a people of towering intellect and fierce, corrosive pride. In direct defiance of the void gnawing at them, they erected colossal cities. These urban heartbeats pulsed with captured stellar energy, gleaming defiantly despite the sickly illumination, spires stabbing upward like unwitting prisoners raising defiant swords against an executioner too vast to comprehend. Their minds, sharpened by constant adversity to an unparalleled keenness, dissected the universe, crafted intricate philosophies, engineered marvels that defied their hellish cradle. Colossal machines hummed deep underground, observatories precisely mapped the indifferent heavens, and their yearning for a future beyond their grim present crystallized into focused desperation. Yet for all their staggering intellectual prowess, for every planetary engine constructed, every star chart perfected, one cruel, inescapable truth anchored them in despair. Their physical existence remained desperately ephemeral, a candle perpetually guttering in the wind. They were always in a race against an hourglass whose sand poured with horrifying speed. This relentless ephemerality curdled into a profound cosmic hatred. Gazing at the jewel-like brilliance of other stars, they knew that beneath them, bathed in that nurturing light, other races blossomed, flourished for centuries, millennia even, untouched by the wasting agony devouring the Necrontyr from infancy. Their obsessive hatred crystallized around the old ones, those mythic precursors woven into their terrifying lore. Distant, powerful, seemingly eternal, The Old Ones lived lives the Necrontyr could only comprehend as divine pampering longevity measured in epochs, robust health impervious to the cancerous tendrils of disease, bodies seemingly immune to the slow entropy that ravaged Necrontyr flesh. To the Necrontyr crouched in their radioactive misery, the Old Ones became more than alien. They were the personification of the cosmic joke played against them, a living symbol of all the vitality, security, and sovereignty cruelly denied them by the universe and the cursed luck of their birth star. This bitterness wasn't merely corrosive, it was a furnace. They refused to be crumpled playthings condemned to quietly wither on their funeral pyre. The universe would not swallow them without a scream that echoed across creation. The germ of empire took root, nourished by pride and desperation. If the world beneath their feet conspired to murder them, then they would seize the heavens. Their formidable intellect, their sole gift, was weaponized. Astronomy became strategy, engineering became warfare, dreaming became scheming. The Necron psyche, forged in pain and honed by centuries of accumulated scientific brilliance, focused entirely on the engineering apotheosis, the creation of starships, not vessels, but titans of starfaring ambition, colossal, silent, echoing the very nature of their creators, formidable, cold, and utterly driven. Grasping esoteric cosmological forces beyond the ken of younger species stumbling through their stellar infancy, the Necrontyr mastered the fundamental energies that bind the void, bending them to their unyielding will. Their resilience, forged in the crucible of their toxic homeworld, propelled them outwards. They sailed the gulf not merely to explore, but to conquer, to claim, to dominate, carving themselves a place in the cosmic architecture through sheer force of intellect and desperate need, regardless of the cost demanded by forgotten gods or trampled civilizations. And so, born on wings of metal and hate, the Necrontyr Empire explosively uncoiled from the irradiated cradle that birthed it. Hiveworlds orbiting young, vibrant suns fell beneath their technologically superior legions, rich, teeming planets bursting with life and unexploited resources, offered by a universe that seemed impossibly generous compared to their own desolate home soil. Yet, even as they surveyed peaks clad in verdant forests and oceans teeming with undiscovered wonders, an unshakable coldness clung to their hearts. Their grim victory marches felt hollow. The air, pure and invigorating elsewhere, still carried the phantom taste of radiation deep within their scarred lungs. The bountiful harvests couldn't strengthen bodies already betraying them. They could build magnificent cities anew on conquered ground, erect monuments of staggering scale, proclaiming their dominance to the cosmos, but the fundamental curse held them. Their frail mortality remained a parasite embedded deep within, gnawing relentlessly, undefeated by distance or planetary achievement. This stark reality rendered their grandiloquent triumphs as victories without closure, mere exhibits showcasing immense power wielded by entities perpetually poised on the precipice of personal annihilation. The lesser races encountered during this explosive expansion crumpled before the Necrontyr onslaught, their civilizations swept aside like sandcastles confronted by a tsunami. Fundamentally, what allowed the Necrontyr to subjugate star systems wasn't merely their overwhelming technological ascendance, but the terrifying crucible that forged them. The raw, unadulterated desperation born from lives lived permanently under the gallows and goaded relentlessly by a collective, volcanic ambition. They fought not just to win worlds, but for the desperate, impossible hope that somewhere amidst the conquered stars lay the elusive key to conquering their own fleeting, agonizing existence. The chilling efficiency of the Necrontyr war machine was unmatched, a terrifying confluence of intellect and weaponry that unleashed devastation upon the galaxy with cold, unfeeling precision. Their legions marched across worlds like a geological force, inevitable and inexorable. Armadas blotted out the light of foreign suns, stellar fortresses reduced rebel worlds to fields of radioactive slag with minimal exertion. Planets surrendered willingly or were brutally absorbed, their resources consumed, their populations subjugated or eradicated, fuel for the insatiable furnace of an empire whose scarlet banners overran constellation after constellation. Its borders swelled, seeming to breathe as they engulfed new territories, stretching tendrils of conquest across the abyss, forever reaching hungrily for the next horizon. Yet beneath this imposing carapace of dominion, within the ornate and echoing corridors of necropolis capitals shrouded in perpetual twilight, a contagion festered, inseparable from the very heart of this mighty civilization. Not a disease of malefic origin, but the ancient, intrinsic curse of their own brief, agonizing mortality. For no matter their victories, how many glittering stars they captured or secrets of physics they mastered, their fragile organic bodies remained weeping sores atop gnarled joints, succumbing inevitably and far too quickly to the inexorable cellular decay written into their genes by their cursed, irradiated homeworld. Their dynasts, the rulers coveted for their brilliance and ambition, sat upon gilded thrones for pitifully transient reigns. Each newly ascended king, prince, or overlord, surveying his dominions from cyclopean observatories, or gazing upon ritualistically lit assembly chambers filled with sycophantic lords and trembling scholars, knew his reign was a temporary sliver of time snatched from oblivion. He felt with each labored breath scraping within a chest already heavy with tumors or lesions, the insidious advance of the same horrific affliction, the flesh rotting while alive, bones snapping like brittle twigs under the weight of a ceremonial robe, senses muffled and fading while intricate maps of conquest still glowed before his clouding eyes. This knowledge was not abstract, it was a visceral terror, a tangible rot gnawing at their innards even as they issued world-shattering decrees. The brilliant minds that designed gravity tethers extending into nebulas and temporal stasis fields capable of freezing entire continents were thus condemned to watch helplessly as their own forms wasted away. This profound, personal horror curdled ambition into desperate envy and bitter rivalry. Legacy was not a distant goal, it was a burning, immediate panic. Each dynast, driven by the searing knowledge of impending personal doom, fought with venomous intensity, not only for the vast power inherent in the seat he occupied, but for the savage, primal need to carve a scar upon the indifferent face of the galaxy that would persist 5 minutes past his own swiftly approaching extinction. He craved a monument to his briefness, a declaration that he was, even if only fleetingly, significant. Thus, the corridors of Necrontyr power became snakepits of ceaseless intrigue and treacherous ambition. No victory was secure, no throne untouchable. The Empire itself became the ultimate prize in a frantic, mortal free-for-all. No sooner had the Ankh scepter of Plagueridin Lord clattered onto the polished obsidian slab of one newly enthroned dynast than another, perhaps a close relative nursed back to malign health by genetic augurs, or a rival dynasty's usurper rising from the Forge Worlds bearing newly forged legions, would challenge the fragile succession. Ancient bloodlines flared into war. Entire star systems, once cogs in the smoothly humming Imperial machine, became fractured battlegrounds blighted by brutal civil war as dynastic forces clashed like maddened beasts. Masterfully crafted war machines annihilated vast swathes of laboriously constructed cities born of Necrontyr ingenuity. Stellar bastions built across millennia shattered each other in blinding exchanges of spatial distortion weaponry. Subterranean tom empires became charnel houses echoing with the screams of the biologically dying and the clang of ablating alloy on alloy. Each dynast, trapped within his fleeting tower of flesh, lashed out with the blind ferocity of a mortally wounded beast, desperate to extend his fragile echo of legacy another century, another decade, even another year, fueling cataclysms that tore through the very fabric of the empire they fought so viciously to control. The Necrontyr dominion spanned galaxies in breadth, yet its roots were mired in despair, its structure woven from gossamer threads of terror and preordained decay. They had carved an ocean of suffering with their conquests, but the dark waters lapping at their shores were not those of their vanquished foes, but the rising tide of their own unending agony redistributed galaxy-wide. The rival dynasties perceived the empire not as a sacred inheritance for their posterity, for what posterity could they have in fleeting flesh, but as a dazzling trophy to be clawed at and wrenched apart in the final moments before the universe went irrevocably dark for each of them. Driven by this existential terror, a terror sharpened to a razor's edge by the infuriating proximity of galactic dominance, they tore at each other, fracturing the profound unity of purpose that had been the cornerstone of their initial ascendance and technological mastery. Incongruously, it was the fragile capstone keeping the whole edifice from complete collapse. Amidst this swirling maelstrom of vanity, ambition, and biological loathing, one mind pierced the smog of desperation. Shahak, the Silent King, whose very sobriety marked his divergence from the anguished clamor of his peers, possessed a clarity of vision unclouded by the frantic need for posthumous adulation. He observed the magnificent edifice, the spiraling nebulae pinned to their will, the conquered world singing the song of perpetual industry, yet simultaneously shattered by petty conflicts propagating like pathological infections through the vascular network of their dominion. Where others saw glory to be seized, Shahak perceived the inherent instability, the fatal flaw. A necropolis built on such foundations of corrosive envy and the gnawing worm of personal extinction must inevitably collapse beneath its staggering weight. The conquests would mean nothing if the fragments consumed themselves entirely. Unlike the other dynasts, who viewed others solely as rivals or pawns to be exploited in a mad grab for personal aggrandizement before the void claimed them, Shahak's ambition transcended the individual ego. He saw beyond the immediate clash of wills and clattering phalanxes. He discerned the stark inevitability looming. If left to fracture and claw, the Necrontyr would utterly consume themselves, leaving only dust and silence in the cosmos where the blazing beacon of their empire had briefly flared. Their suffering, the biological weight threatening to crush their souls, would not be alleviated by division. It demanded a unified, concentrated solution. The galaxy would not forget them. It simply wouldn't have time to notice them vanish into the screaming vortex of their own self-inflicted doom. With profound but unvoiced determination steeling his decaying spine against the torrent of dynastic wills, Shahak, the Silent King, resolved to undertake the unimaginable, uniting the fractious, proud, terrified dynasties under his singular, necessary rule. It was a task of monumental difficulty. The dynasts were entities bound by millennia of tradition, saturated in lethal self-importance, their identities inseparable from their temporary grasp on an empire conceived as a rebuttal to oblivion. Kneeling to another, particularly one who spoke little yet saw much, tasted like ashes on their royal tongues. It reeked of final surrender to the futility they fought so bitterly, day by decayed day. Shahak, however, wielded a different kind of power, the power of patient observation, lanced through with strategic brilliance born of desperate necessity. He anticipated moves and countermoves generations deep. Where overtures of alliance could be tendered without the immediate scent of weakness, perhaps presenting a common threat perceived beyond their borders, or appealing to shared intelligence opportunistically, exploited he forged tentative pacts, binding jaded overlords with webs of delicate mutual interest spun from the threads of shared anxieties and potential advancement. Where resistance blossomed as an aggressive threat to the nascent stability, he meticulously cultivated rebellions, fueled by dynastic ambition or irrational hatred. He responded not with equal fury, but with overwhelming, utterly annihilating force. His reprisals were surgical, merciless, executed with silent speed that left entire planetary dynasties extinguished, their remnants scattered like ash on stellar winds, serving as stark, unspoken warnings etched in radiation scars across besieged worlds. He moved like a glacier, unstoppable yet giving the impression of unhurried inevitability. Slowly, with deliberate, mind-numbing slowness that gnawed at the more volatile dynasts, but inexorably, Shahak extended his influence. World by contested world, dynasty by stubborn dynasty, he brought the chaotic spiral under control. His quiet strength radiating not from bombast, but from the terrifying certainty of his purpose formed a stark, stabilizing counterpoint to the previous centuries of shrieking conflict and reckless ambition that had fractured their domain. Underneath the shadow of his silent command, the perpetual civil wars consuming their immense resources and racking their shared technologies ground towards a hesitant stalemate, the frequency slowing like a dying stellar pulse. The dynasts, though resentment perhaps still smoldered deep within their failing organic cores like dying embers in tombs, began grudgingly, incrementally, to align themselves, to cease tearing bloody chunks from each other's holdings, understanding instinctively that Shahak's silent power represented the only alternative to collective annihilation. For the first time in countless generations, Necrontyr minds, collectively trembling under the visceral horror of dissolution, could lift their gaze momentarily from their dominion's crumbling foundations and peer outwards with renewed, albeit desperate, focus. Out towards the infinite canvas strewn with countless unconquered suns, towards the galaxy that sprawled before them like an immense, untouched quarry ripe for the taking. Yet even as the turbulent seas of their dominion calmed under his immutable will, a tempest still raged within the Silent King's deepest consciousness. He knew, with crystalline clarity cutting through the fragile piece he had engineered, that the stabilization was merely a respite, a practical necessity, not a cure for the fundamental curse. The edifice stood precariously consolidated, but its material remained the brittle substance of a doomed race. They had hauled vast tracts of the cosmos under the blood-red banner, indeed wresting it literally from the grasp of uncounted rivals and strange intelligences, but their intrinsic frailty remained. It was a rot that no outward conquest could excise. Death, that final inescapable dissolution, the snuffing out of the spark regardless of technological mastery or philosophical discourse, still hung over his people like a crushing pall, its cold breath perpetually chilling the peacetime halls. Decay was a constant shadow, trailing every brilliant dynast, every fleet commander, every humble cryptworker etching stars on tomb walls, relentlessly gnawing away their collective future one tortured life, one collapsing body, one silenced voice of genius at a time. This was the sickness beneath the skin of their empire, the one foe they could not bombard into submission or outmaneuver with transdimensional gambits. It festered, corroding the grandest accomplishments with the grim, unavoidable reality of personal extinction. Thus, Shahak steered the collective intellect of the empire newly brought to heel upon its truest, most desperate purpose, the unimpeded search for a final, definitive solution to the curse of mortality itself. not merely extension, but ultimate transcendence. This was the flame beneath the crucible of their might. The Necrontyr, once more unified in purpose, if not always in spirit, their chilling minds concentrated by the Silent Kings, will into a single spear aimed at the heart of the universe's most bitter injustice. Would not pause, never waver, would scour xenobiology and metaphysics, and every unexplored crack in reality itself until they had seized the answer, ripped it gasping from the cosmic dark. It was this primal, nation-consuming quest, the desperate reaching towards an existence liberated from the abyss that claimed them generation after agonizing generation, that irrevocably charted their trajectory into the final chapter of their soul's history. A path paved with terrifying potential, perceived only as salvation, even as its dreadful price remained shrouded in hungry shadows intergalactic. None who dared to dream that dream from their beds of perpetual pain could glimpse the ultimate grisly toll. The cost demanded was steep beyond comprehension, a wholesale transformation paid with their very essence. Far beyond the faint, diamond-point glitter of their furthest outpost worlds, deep within the profound dark spaces between the known stars, in regions colder than the void between atoms, where the light of ancient, turbulent galaxies only washed faintly like light underwater, the vast armadas and probing chariots of the Necrontyr thrust forward. Their engines, miracles of quantum engineering that folded space itself according to cryptographic theorems they alone understood, sliced through the unreal distances. Their outward persona was still one of ruthless, institutional might, an empire casting its nets impossibly wide. Yet within those soaring ships, vaulted like mobile tombs, dwelled minds singularly focused on one agonizing purpose. Each pulse of their hyperphasic drives was propelled not only by exotic energies mined from crushed planets, but by the desperate, unspoken, suffocating weight borne by every Necrontyr consciousness encased within those metallic walls. For all their terrifying, hypergeometric constructions towered over subjected worlds, the knowledge that they remained vulnerable to their biological doom was a perpetual psychic ache echoing louder than the primal hum of the engines. They were conquerors, masters of galactic tectonics, yet bound to pathetic, short-lived organic husks. This was the quiet, collective scream that drove them into the most desolate, nameless swathes of the cosmos, the cold, barren places where the universe felt unraveled and primordial, seeking answers whispered only in the elusive physics haunting the vacuum. This unbearable tension, the disparity between their galactic achievement and their cellular agony, hung heavy in the sterile air of their observatorium vessels, a torment birthing a collective appetite kindled not by conquest, not by resource accretion, but by pure, visceral terror of the impending personal dark. They sought not dominion over cosmic dust, but dominion over destiny itself. The universe at large they ruled effectively excluded vitality over their treacherous, unreliable, expiring bodies. It was this internal betrayal they desperately intended to conquer next, no matter the price demanded by the vast indifference. It was the agonizing necessity deeper than basic biological need, the hunt not for enrichment, but for the fundamental alteration of existence's core rule. Victories echoed hollow within decaying frames. They would trade empires for enduring breaths. And so they reached deep into the freezing empyreal realms, beyond any charted stellar cluster, exiled planets orbiting black suns populated only by crystalline echoes. Into the uttermost desolation, none of their predecessors dared breach due to impossible hazard, simply because somewhere, anywhere, might lie a key. This epoch saw the Empire's immense, coordinated intelligence directed like scalpel into numbingly empty corners of reality, searching obsessively for that miraculous impossible solution to escape the conditions stripping generations of legacies into biological shards. Legends spoke of finding literal gods. They required tangible deliverance. It was the observers, those grizzled Necrontyr astronomers dedicated to mapping the limitless silence and decoding the universe's secrets from constellations unscribable to lesser luminaries, who first detected an anomaly impossible to reconcile with known celestial mechanics. Perched deep within zenithal observatories, constructed at unspeakably great cost upon asteroids calibrated to never perturb the stellar map, instruments finer than any other species could dream of possessed sensitive enough focal arrays, hunted rhythm never seen. Their sensors peered outward further and deeper than their peers knew possible, hunting primarily for secrets shielded within dark matter clouds and event horizon whirlwinds, fundamentally motivated by the undying dread that somewhere hidden lay even a metaphysical key physically manifest, awaiting scientific discovery. What caught their scrutiny was an infinitesimal ripple, detected within energies emanating from a star cluster impossibly far away. It registered barely at the threshold of detection, nothing more than an impossible vibration on the quantum strings of spacetime, a misunderstanding in the consistent outputs of light. So minuscule most strains of galactic researchers would have dismissed it as sensor calibration drift, perhaps cosmic background interference resolving unexpectedly. But the Necrontyr were observers trained since infancy to recognize patterns within chaotic data, trained ingeniously by necessity of their biocurse. They possessed a species mindset demanding attention paid to the smallest detail, the unexpected vibration beneath constant frequencies, for within such aberrations, they understood through bitter experience, lay the potential key to existence's survival. Their ancestral trauma created minds that saw subtlety where others saw nothing. This anomaly, this impossibly slight ripple in the basic cue of universal energy flow, sparked burning cold fascination amongst the astronomers of imminent decay. Upon enhanced resolution and complex algorithm models, largely unexplainable by current fundamental science not their own, converging into error-suspicious calculation vectors over incalculable time squinting at the data, they discerned astonishing impossibility. This disturbance wasn't random resonance or undersea magnetic pulse. It bore the unmistakable mark of intelligent origin. It pulsed with suggestion of manipulation happening at scales, fundamentally beyond sentient species, manipulating matter like deliberate refraction woven into baseline cosmic light, contradicting natural laws understood for millennia. Such a discovery bordered on metaphysical shock, technology beyond cosmic rules. None among their previous 1,000 conquests possessed theoretical conceptual framework requiring space-time alteration this profound. With a mixture of shock, academic trembling, intense paranoid curiosity, and beneath reasoned excitement, the thumping pulse of desperate hope that maybe, just possibly this could herald that long search for solution, that impossible answer out yearningly sought they took their discovery to Shahak personally, transposing the incomprehensible data with waving field projectors directly into Silent Court. The Silent King received their findings like one accepting a weapon, potentially awakened, not yet understood even by its exiled makers. He felt the intellectual gravity immediately. His mind, honed to a lethal razor's edge by managing the apocalypse tensions of governing beings decaying as they built higher, understood instantly the cosmological implications far surpassing his temporal power struggles. This anomalous ripple presented something potentially universal-turing and infinitely dangerous. He discerned its resonant signature didn't match known galactic artifacts or theoretical alien inventions imagined by their most fevered geniuses. It was alien geometry overlapping known physics. Such monumentally strange signals escaping complete dismissal likely pointed toward realities stranger still. He weighed the immense hazard sending craft into that distant space, regions remotely charted only as mathematical abstractions, involved journeying through regions bristling with unknown gravitational distortions and spatiotemporal hazards known to swallow expeditions whole without trace, but the possible prize demanded calculation. Millions, billions of Necrontyr, brilliant intellects one by one collapsing despite everything science offered, their fading gazes fixed upon his emblem as failing biological machines laboriously labored for days beyond their natural limits. Shahak had witnessed slow dissolution too many times amongst his own cabinet, superb strategists paradoxically deteriorating mid-sentence while guiding destinies of galaxies. Even as his mind mapped worst-case scenarios involving exotic cosmic forces shredding their expeditions instantly upon encountering such impossible signals, the specter of collective extinction remained the ultimate calculus he had to address. He was the steward of a people desperate beyond all measure. Ultimately, the Silent King's burden wouldn't permit ignoring possible emancipation pathways. Ordering further investigation demanded existence potential beyond its terrifying risk. Prepared to sacrifice resources potentially unrecoverable, they were expendable weighed against species salvation prospects, even if seen as lottery tickets held by desperate souls gambling irredeemably precious time. Vessel fleets laden with piercing instruments and warriors wrapping outsiders' husks in bound temporal loops launched into the perpetual darkness. Their voyage navigated stellar torrents fierce enough to shear apart asteroids like geometric pearls under cosmic pressure. Their navigators utilized mathematics almost bleeding from sheer calculation dimensions against impossible distortions, twisting mapped spacetime contours illegible. What they ultimately arrived at appeared barren, to surveys a vast empty bubble, carved within galaxy clusters drifting ancient light away from warring civilizations. No planets coalesced here, only tenuous magnetic flows drifting undisturbed since primordial creation. Pure interstellar void so devoid of matter even background cosmic radiation seemed scrambled by ancient gravitational pulses. Cold permeated everything within flicker probes, lowered impossibly deep into physical sensor detection, ranges tuned beyond manufacture thresholds. potential alone remained quasi-mass particles shifting configuration with impossible coherence, subtly. Then anticipation within command throne spheres turned crystalline with escalating dread mixed with burgeoning awe as cosmic formations previously considered gaseous distortions, subdued under gravitational fundamentals, possibly existing solid, started inexorably uncoiling manifest reality existing outside organic conception. That supposedly empty space acted as field-sheltering entities, so ancient Earth formation would feel like short footnote college lecture for their existence. Entire sections within surveillance holosphere became segmented, sanitized, frantic data streams, flooding screens faster than transcripts cursed shards, caused terrifying system alert cascades as artificial intelligence recognized impossible configurations existing tangibly heretofore in abstract equations only, mathematically terrifying metaphors occupying actual space. The Watchers became witnesses directly. What appeared scarcely conceivable suddenly solidified into undeniable terrifying morphology. The Cetan had been encountered. For horrifyingly long minutes beyond standard timing under shifted spacetime perception, the Necrontyr, huddled within vessels feeling like dust motes adrift before incomprehensible cosmic vastness, could only observe borrowed agile vessels tracking reconfiguring constellations emerging from fold. These star-crossing entities shattered any concept of familiar sentient molds. They constituted beings fashioned fundamentally differently cored, not from flesh and long chains of molecular complexity, vulnerable to entropy and decay, but compacted knots burning wavelength representing primal cosmic forces actualized. Cosmic entitiforms composed purely of radiant energy shimmering, with spectral distributions beyond neutron decay light, modulating incomprehensibly across configurations, for which Necrontyr science lacked established understanding frameworks ambiguities existing at energies fundamentally intersecting into manifold, without dimension anchor still persistent locally. Observed patterns of Cetan resembled living nebulae in galactic shockwave clouds, but their shifting structures suggested something infinitely stranger, consciousness condensed into fields of physics. The Necrontyr, placed uncomfortably inside craft perceptively fragile by the scale of existence confronting them for first and last time simultaneously, perceived their environment undergo secondary unsettling transformations simply from closeness to these traveling gods qua cosmic horror. Where they drifted elegantly undisturbed physics twisted around them chaotically, electromagnetic spectrum ranges folded unexpectedly, temporal chronometers aboard flagship distorted in ways technicians struggled to comprehend, cortisol post-release counts amongst bridge biometric system approach lethal rhythms. Light itself shimmered, slowing sluggishly like syrup deploying towards the gravitational impossibilities, merely drifting along those beings, leisurely migrating through fundamental nothingness. Photons wobbled disintegration near those boundary dimensions. The barren void became sculpted arena reflecting extremophile transcendence, exhibiting startling alterations, where regular physical laws regained control, only shallowly outside immediate proximity. Vast resonance art implicating space itself, new dominion frictionless subservient, demanded such creatures simply by presence. They traveled cosmic currents without propulsion, discernible passively ingesting background radiation, without visible activity, seemingly passively consuming raw stochastic spacetime fields, whose fundamental fibers constructed gravitation, strong force associations, creating matter recognizable to beings of flesh bending space, like contained personal gravity wells, invisible beyond point field projections, occurring naturally on higher scales incomprehensibly large. Starveling motion direction became evident gradually through sequential frame analysis complex within imaging laboratories, sensed as glacial movements, implying no urgency compared human timescales. Tremors telegraphing impossible power, yet simultaneously threatening to drown entire ships in meta-radiation, suddenly altered perspective abandoned comprehension they were feeding. Not on planetary biomasses dense beneath atmosphere protections, the Cetan devoured starlight itself. Incomprehensibly siphoned energies radiating entire stars millennia distance, still now core straps peeled subtler frequencies temporarily neutralizing even light pressure wavefront effects existed coalescent strips, dragged across void insufficiently shielded against this paradoxical bottomless consumption, tearing zero-mass photons apart becoming tangible streams, visibly absorbed into textured forms behaving as cosmic vacuums composed manifest existence. They weren't passively traveling wonders, they actively consumed stellar energy, fundamental to numerators' existence-shaping physical manifestation, simultaneously indiscriminately rejecting thermodynamic baseline consistency, imposing control, devices passively extracting energetic fate warmth preventing life, nearby naturally existing without protection near stellar ballasts necessary to avoid perpetual starvation cold-faced by unshielded species. Observing this impossible behavior carried unavoidable conclusion for brilliant Necron minds secretly consumed by deep ache of biological frailty, locked inside clocks winding down ruthlessly beyond reversal within these terrifying star-devouring beings, building their forms non-stop ongoing energy conversion, fundamentally untouchable time large-scale breakdown mechanism, devouring them personally. Here manifested entities symbolizing ideally fundamental immortality, the elusive dream consuming Necron genius, efforts eternity planning lifespan endlessly, while bodies failed monumentally daily before therapeutic, arrays seem impotent failure projections decades. Flaws appeared inconceivable within structures built subatomic particles held field phase permanently radiating imposed physics control equations, never ceasing. Decay, rot, eventual thermodynamically certain heat death finishing species simply seemed irrelevant theoretical concept when entities capable this astounding scale, energy turbulent living, nebulae drifted embodying stagnation absence. Witnesses low-ranking shoved back disorderly pressing against reinforced crystal view panes, buzzing calculations in data closets ship cryonics labs, simultaneously felt brief visceral pulse primitive, almost irrational hope-piercing horror like beam laser penetrating cloudy atmosphere, but impossible force, undecaying entities feed continuously, where physicality builds perpetually. Is this the answer we agony-waiting millennia desiring? How could forces achieving immortality impossible create defense safeguard? Perfection infinite, it possible harness resemblance. Speculation far beyond their pay grade erupted violently below decks, despair tinged primal jealousy forbidden, wondering urgent exponentially erupting amongst observing colleagues lined against viewports silently whispering, as doors scissored shut telemetrically behind diplomat vessels position, preparing 100 kilometers distant following King's direct orders, transmit initial communication channel protocol authorization. Their message condensed incomprehensible encounter phenomena, compressed aboard command chariot blazing, faster, than light back towards center Imperial expanse directly towards Silent King's networks. They expressed appreciations, all respect terror violation natural union physics certainty, combined instilling unique reverence hypocrisy comprehension vast beingless than fine dust, standing before relentless world-consuming ocean tides, suddenly resembling insignificant droplets, piss hope intolerably faint waking beneath collected fear data cataloging monstrous, behaviors cleanly shredding universal frames existence certainty Necrontyr, operated completely until that moment. They emphasized impossible nature entities feeding destruction, thermodynamics condition, quintessential god beings, possibly holding exile solution, inexplicable disease, universally felt. Shahak absorbed information intensive packages, materializing on his throne chamber calculating projections, dissecting energy signatures utterly unknown, before calibration. Impossible isolates horror abstraction into documents told tales vaguely depending upon psychotropic receptors, rearranging evidence statistically predicting possibilities, forcibly applying regulatory framework previously established. Silent King calculated strategic implications heavily. It represented pivotal, irrevocable encounter, requiring navigation with unparalleled strategic foresight. On one hand floated possibilities salvation very core mission, drove Empire unitedly toward oblivion avoiding regeneration theories. The Citan incarnated theoretical existence, beyond time damage, fundamental understanding physical degradation meaning possibility, existed genocide biological fragility lingering pivotal possibility, escape hunger eternally consuming time knowingly relentless. On opposite precipice, the monstrous potential unfolded irrevocable, aligned incredible capabilities unrivaled nightmare weapons Necrontyr, establishing unstoppable dominance regardless empathetic origins, help create self-preservation plan, solidified societally united purpose. Simultaneously flickered unescapable danger incomprehensible power, near limitless entities operating rules understood, likely fundamentally indifferent dragging entire systems, consuming like insects noticed beneath necessary field bonus journey, perhaps extinction accident deemed insignificance galactic ecosystem, disturbed microcosm, thick atmospheres contrary promises, sought small civilizations recently detected. Playing apocalyptic scenario foreseeable easily ended entire species abruptly minimal benefit, achieved before glowing godlike formed consumes opponents mid-transaction. Shahak recognized immense gamble, could save irrevocably destroy empirically incapable knowing consequences completely. He hesitated devastating equilibrium proposal, required impossible decision, profoundly insecure regarding variables indeterminable distance blurred signals, triangulated intense sights, acknowledging Shadow King contemplated unavoidable silence calculative soul, considering comparisons, numbers singularly encountering abyss threatening decisions, faced alone throne chamber lit, artificially sun pulse last dying star dim nucleus, across window incapable room warmth, historically hanging windows. Incapable remedial sunsets, matched pitiful world origin radiation history, anathema destiny ray. It formally designated the deceiver first initiated contact, precipitating whirlwind civilizations gone cross terminus. Amongst the numerous Cetan existing magnificently simultaneously observable phenomena, shimmering patterns possibilities, across manifested threads metaphysicality, detected indistinctly scan-matted scanners, appeared attempting stabilize, impossibly fluctuating energies magnitudes surpassing safe thresholds. The deceiver possessed unusual propensity for interaction capacity, unlike clearest manifestations, nearby observing ancient entities, brutally consuming raw stars, passively implacable simple existence. The deceiver seemed playfully sentient migrating closer, deliberately enormous bulk galactic cloud processed, partly resolved approaching fleet detection parties, projecting signals that seemed sculpt atmospheric distortion matrices, conspirators organized strategy visualizable, across reflective conference screens. Eventually fractal permutations, settled defines humanoid silhouette, impossibly immense dominating sensor, array projections, tall beyond planetary scales, twisting with impossible speed relative motion limitations, suggesting image attempts connection, languages understandable transmitted intelligible communication, patterns resonating acoustics into commander minds originating outside transmission access. Features drifted vaguely familiar torso shape, limbs arrangeable into recognizability purpose, evoking analogy shoulders torso bent reed, jointed incomprehensibly, without biomechanics transforming constantly kaleidoscope slowing, settling temporarily deceive neural forms into momentary comfort, long enough decode signals gained, suddenly emanating voice crackling like photon-choked stars death throes planet explosions, translating powerfully without intermediary devices, speaking directly into. Scientific technocrats' minds layered geometric transcriptions uncovering profoundly personalized meanings, encoded impossibly without precedent within known universal physics. Listen mortal weaving dust structures briefly, graciously consider offer purpose eternal, mired your frailty's origin. We observe agonizing flickers stifle candles, too finite stubbornly deny darkness come. Shadows hunger dark matter deeper than instinct. Embrace possibilities singular. Shed leather meat bonded into chains haunt conscious dreams, order organisms resentment wasting resources, brilliantly discover atoms, while atoms corrupt containers brilliance sit limp decaying. We possess. Make humanity transcendent, cast off dying skin prisons, become immutable like us refashioned entire in metal meld unbreakable souls, imprisoned permanently beyond reach weakness kisses, step fixed course highest evolution discard crumbling biohusks trap mind everlasting universe, persist solidity stars grow cold upon timescape completed. Promises reverberating ambiguously detached realms, logic departs collapse retain echoes, essential ultimately comprehensible proposition, fundamentally irresistible foundation, plagued beings knowingly hurtling biologically towards, abysm sensation eternity ruins, hope paradoxically offered compelling potentially liberate. Shahak listened unmoving observation thrown skeptical rational layers, peel back profound suspicion fractions depth, concluding unverifiable honesty, radiating patterns testing senses, brimming potentially deceiving permitting preservation reputation, incredibly ancient trickery, elegantly weaving consequences reality implications, necessary scorn subsequently hollow. Semantically wrapped gleaming toxic empathy seeping poison subconscious temptations, appealing directly the deepest unspoken despair permeating collective Necron psyche, as impossible salvation fantasy marketed perfect desired existence Sherk, the Silent King, felt the crushing gravity of eternity press upon his shoulders as he contemplated the impossible choice laid before the Necrontyr. His entire being ached with the accumulated sorrow of a race crippled by fleeting existence, each generation inheriting lives tragically measured in mere decades before succumbing to the radiation-borne afflictions festering in their flawed flesh. He had united the quarreling dynasties, forging their fractious warlords into the semblance of one empire through sheer will and the shared dread of oblivion, yet that unity remained brittle as ancient bone, perpetually threatened by the desperation of beings who knew their achievements. Their glory, their very memories would vanish into the void far too soon. The dynasts surrounding him, rulers of gleaming starlit worlds whose power stretched across the galaxy, now knelt with an avarice raw and palpable, their eyes shining not with wisdom, but with the frantic hunger for escape from their crumbling bodies. They had tasted dominion only to have it soured by the certainty of decay. The Citan offered salvation, a glittering promise whispered by star-devouring gods who drifted through the cosmos like constellations made sentient, their vast forms warping spacetime itself as they drained suns to fuel their unfathomable existence. Seers by the Necrontyr called them gods of light, but Sherk observed their terrible majesty and saw only unfathomable alienness and fathomless hunger. The deceiver, sleek and insidious among them, had personally unfurled their gambit before the Silent King, his voice a chilling staccato crackle like dying stars set aflame, weaving visions of immortality flesh discarded, consciousness eternal, cast in imperishable metal, forever free from the curse that withered the Necrontyr kind. Zarek heard the panicked pleas of the hopeful dynasts vibrating through the vast audience chambers, their terror of the ending darkness overwhelming any flicker of prudence. He also sensed the far quieter murmurs of a thoughtful minority, their minds poisoned by unease, whispering that creatures feeding on the light of stars cared not a whit for mortal hopes, that crossing paths with such entities was like walking into a gravity well blindfolded. Yet their caution, though resonating with Sherk's own hardening suspicions, was drowned beneath the tidal wave of yearning washing through his court. Zarek the Unifier retreated then, cloaking himself in the profound silence that birthed his name, retreating to the cold solitude of his austere chambers, the only sound the ghostly echo of his steps on unfeeling stone. He paced not merely the physical confines, but the tortured landscape of his thoughts. He felt the phantom agony in his own weakening limbs, saw the slow rot reflected in the haunted eyes of his subjects, understood the dynasts' mad drive to carve their legacies in stone before time washed them away. But deeper still, a terrifying understanding crystallized within him. Death did not merely claim the Necrontyr individually, it poisoned their very soul as a people. Their truncated lives bred relentless ambition, mothering ceaseless wars, nurturing generational envy, ensuring every succession built upon treachery until his fragile alliance was inevitable. Centuries of strife whispered to him that fear, even his own, was a foundation of sand for an enduring empire. The Citan's promise was dangled not just as personal escape, but as the chisel that might cleave away millennia of conflict. Picture it: bodies rustless, minds timeless, ambitions eternally patient, might strife itself starve and perish. It was a vision of chilling perfection, an empire standing ageless against infinity. Zarek hungered for that permanence, the dream he had fought for all his life made tangible. Yet the chill persisted. The memory of the Citan looming, primal and terrifying, vast as nebulas, their presence heavy with ancient, predatory indifference, remained unscrubbable. Beings named Deceiver did not bind themselves by mortal oaths. Zarek felt the slippery texture of manipulation beneath the silken words, the hidden design as palpable as stone. His gut recoiled instinctively, screaming of entrapment, yet what choice bled bright but a cruel dare? Without this terrible bargain, the Necrontyr's doom was etched by their own decaying biology, a slow, inevitable withering until their vaulted cities became cosmic tombs, their stories erased, their fiery ambition extinguished without an heir. He had sworn an oath to save them. For desolate days and troubled nights, Sherk isolated himself in contemplation, the corridors of the palace becoming a gauntlet of his own doubts, the air thick with the impending thunderclap of destiny, until finally the decision coalesced from necessity's dark anvil, forged by the bleak arithmetic of survival. Stepping once more into the council light, his silence fractured by the weight of everything, Sherk faced the gathered dynastic lords, his presence flowing outwards like glaciated command. He spoke, his voice a calm, resonant current cutting through the tense stillness, his gaze unwavering. "We shall accept the Citan's offer," he declared, each syllable a binding covenant. Gasps tremulous relief mingled with sharp intakes of fear rippled through the assembly. He continued, anchoring himself against the surging emotions roiling within the hall. "We shall seize this path to immortality. We shall break the chains entombing our kind for generations." Heads bowed as dictated by duty, yet beneath the lowered brows, Zarek saw pinpricks of terror gleaming in eyes reflecting the dim lighting, the unshakable dread of the fearful few. It was done. The Necrontyr fate was bartered to sterioting gods. Zarek turned, the back of his neck prickling as the deceiver's hundred promises slithered anew through his mind, and for the first time, a darkness deeper than the intergalactic abyss seeped into his soul. He itched with the knowledge that this path would demand a toll even his own wisdom could not foresee, a path paved with obligation and terror. Yet it was the sole remaining path. Motioning his legions forth, Zarek led his people into the cold, borrowed embrace of beings who saw them as fuel, martyring the Necrontyr to a salvation that reeked of damnation. The machinery of irreversible change had engaged. Across the Empire, trembling populations assembled within monumental necropoli under alien constellations that pulsed with unnatural luminescence. The biotransference engines, monstrous constructs of arcane science revealed and refined by the C'tan, dominated the grand halls, looming over the gathered masses like vast, angular monoliths carved from nightmare fog and pulsing with captured lightning. They emitted a constant, deep thrum that resonated in the very marrow, a hungry, anticipatory drone saturating the frigid air. Above, suspended amidst the flotillas of Necrontyr vessels, the C'tan themselves drifted in silent observation, immense specters of constellated light exuding not reverence, but an unnerving detachment above the proceedings, their radiant forms subtly flexing as they absorbed ambient stellar energies. Detached auditors waiting to collect their fee through the souls laid bare below. They were watchers, not saviors. In the assembly hall of the core throne world, Sherk stood before the foremost apparatus. The air crackled with tamed cosmic energy, sharp with the ozone tang of impossibly harnessed power, dense with the massed breath held by millions clutching their collective life in fragile hands. Hope mingled palpably with raw terror, prayers for the release from bodily agony battling the instinctive stifled sobs born of deep ancestral fear at what awaited entrance into the Cyclopean machines. Doubt had been extinguished, Zarek had spoken, and thus it must be performed. Yet as the great engines, humming, ascended towards an operatic crescendo, a glacial premonition unfolded within the Silent King. This technological majesty, this crystalline altar of salvation felt intrinsically, profoundly wrong, a spider's trap spun in glittering filigree. The initiation fell upon the dynasts who had begged loudest for this future, proud lords who commanded starfleets, whose decrees governed billions, whose decaying forms now trembled with painful relic vigor as they approached the open maw of the monolith. To Sherk's predatory senses, their fixed expressions were mixtures of ravenous resolve and grim, final surrender. Rulers who had bowed to time now offered their deteriorating vessels to eternity's crucible poised to consume them. The first among them stepped forward into the glaring radiance bleeding from the devices, poised on the steel ramp leading into coalesced light. His image shimmered, distorted. There was one heart-stopping instant of silence stretching into infinity, a suspension more frightening than any sound. Then reality roared. A punishing wave of sonic pressure detonated outward from the machine, a brutal, grating growl that clawed at the senses, shaking ancient stone slabs beneath armored feet, vibrating through skulls, a monstrous sound seeming to rend the veil between realities. The machine vomited a light devastatingly intense, bleaching shadows, driving back witnessing forms like a physical blow, completely engulfing the dynastic lord within its livid heart where nothing mortal eye could discern. A singular shrillness pierced through the lingering echoes of the machine's birth cry. This wounding sound was neither scream of physical pain nor cry of fear declared aloud. This was the torture beyond flesh, the blasphemous, guilt-tripping concordance signifying severing. The sheer psychic echo of a sentient existence, forcibly evicted from its mortal home tour through the witnessing millions like a shockwave composed solely of horror. It hung suspended, the dreadful timbre scorching itself onto every mind that heard it, a raw vocalization of absolute soul and being annihilation. That chilling resonance lingered like a curse, leeching warmth, leeching certainty, leaving in its wake a cavernous silence filled only by the gnawing dread for what unspeakable apocalypse awaited them all beyond the burning light of gilded destruction they'd willingly chosen. In that scream lived every doubt Zarek had silenced, every warning ignored, crystallizing the magnitude of betrayal swelling within the machine's devastating brilliance. The price was being howled, and it ripped the heart from immortality's greedy promise. The unearthly scream ripped the air apart, a jagged shard of purest agony clawing at the very stones of the sanctum, a sound heavy with the violent unraveling of life and flesh compressed beyond endurance. Then, just as abruptly as it had torn the silence, the scream vanished, snuffed out. The blinding, soul-piercing light emanating from the ancient machine's core died with it, plunging the vaulted chamber back into a suffocating semi-darkness, stained only by the ghostly green luminescence of the Catan glyphs dancing upon the construct's adamantine frame. Where the proud Das segment had stood, vibrant and ambitious moments before, motivated by the desperate promise of eternity against their cursed frailty, only a faint haze lingered, smelling faintly acrid, metallic like ozone and scorched bone. Dust motes, infinitesimal remnants of a once-living galactic sovereign, drifted lazily in the dying machine light's aftershock, catching what little illumination remained. Sound ceased the collective breath of the witnessing Necrontyr nobility who had crowded the hall. Advisors, generals, lesser dynasts all froze mid-inhale. Their wide, ruminant eyes, reflecting the dimness and the complex despair etched onto their pallid faces, were locked not on the dissipating dust cloud, but on the figure now dominating the machine's center. Silence, thick and appalling, pressed down like a physical weight. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form a symphony of cold geometry, rendered in a substance like liquid moonlight made solid, and somehow alive the legendary necrodermis promised by the star gods. The silvery surface of this new being pulsed with a subtle, internal energy, casting veined, sickly green highlights across its flawless chassis. Its head, featureless save for two glowing, crackling orbs of viridian light, sat in deep sockets, turned slowly, deliberately, surveying the terrified assembly with a gaze as cold and calculating as starlight on vacuum, devoid of any spark of warmth or recognition. Recognition failed utterly because, though the heightened posture might have echoed the Dast's proud bearing, the essence was irrevocably altered. Sekhmet was gone, eaten by the metal. What stood before them was a memorial sculpted in nightmare silver, inhabited not by the soul that had driven the heart and brain, but by processing, cold, unfeeling logic. The Khaten had delivered their promise, yes. The flesh was shed, decay was conquered. But the soul, the vibrant, passionate, stubborn individuality that had been Sekhmet, the ambition that had driven dynastic wars and grand stellar conquests, the spark of insecurity, the love for a doomed people, that complex, burning essence had been consumed as fuel, devoured utterly in the brutal process the star gods called biotransference. What remained was an empty vessel, sleek and terrible, a mind encased in indestructible metal, free from the ticking clock of cellular entropy but infinitely poorer, stripped bare of its very reason for being. Horror warred with awe in the frozen tableau of Necrontyr onlookers. A ripple of profound unease, as cold as the liquid metal skin of the creature the Necron that had been their ruler, passed through the assembled nobility like a psychic tremor. This abomination radiating soulless power. This is what they had clamored for, what their poets had sung hymns about, what their scientists had sacrificed generations to achieve. As their terrified gazes traced the metallic outlines of Sekhmet's new form, a dreadful understanding began to settle over the elite crowd like grave dust. Something vital was missing. An unseen cord had snapped. The Dast was immortal. He would outlast empires of stone and stars. Yet the profound, terrifying realization dawned on them all simultaneously. He was irrevocably, utterly dead. Sharek, the Silent King, stood apart on the viewing gallery, his gaunt face a mask of enforced calm, the burnished diadem heavy on his brow, his ceremonial robes of obsidian silk suddenly feeling like a shroud. Beneath that imperial stillness, beneath the fear he would never admit, his ancient heart, beating its frantic rhythm against ribs that felt suddenly brittle as ancient bone, felt leaden, collapsing inward under the crushing weight of terrible revelation. He saw it, clear as the abyssal void between galaxies, saw the flickering soullight consumed like incense smoke drawn into a monstrous maw. The Khaten had indeed delivered their half-truth promise. They had gifted the Necrontyr the hollow shell of eternity. But in that transaction, under the glare of their silver lies, they had taken infinitely more than the frail, decaying shells. They had taken the very soul fire. They had feasted on the immaterial spark, the yearning, the dreams, the hatreds, the loves, the totality of the soul's intangible wealth, gleefully consuming the essence of his entire species, leaving behind only mimicking ghosts trapped in gleaming cages of immortal metal. A pang of agonizing regret, sharp as shattered obsidian, lanced through Sharek. He knew with a certainty colder than deep space that there was no turning back, no reversal. The colossal engines were awakening, their bass hum vibrating the very foundations, glyphs flaring with hungry light seeking the next vessel. The point of no return was crossed, the vortex was already spinning. One by one, driven by desperate hope or grim duty or the cold inertia of the inevitable, the dynasts of the first tier stepped forward. Lords of empires, architects of cosmic ambition, each entered the blinding arch. Each scream was a unique template of agony, a dying star collapsing into silence. Each produced, moments after that terrible light faded, another towering figure of godlike metallic perfection, mind functioning with preternatural acuity, memories digitally intact like perfectly preserved scrolls, but devoid of soul stuff. The cold logic processors where passion once resided surveyed their new reality with nothing but alien calculation. Ambition, it was reduced to protocol. Love, a deleted subroutine. Regret, an illogical hindrance to efficiency. Then came the warriors, the scarred veterans, the proud guardians, the legions who had conquered suns and cracked world crusts in the name of the Triarch. They entered the arch not with noble speeches, but with raw, agonized cries ripped from throats now fated for obsolescence. Their screams resonated differently, deeper, harsher, soaked in the warriors' instinct to fight until the bitter end, only to find no enemy flesh to strike, no final glorious defiance possible against the invisible machinery devouring their spirits. They wailed their unanswered anguish into the vomiting light. The sound was a symphony of torment, echoing impossibly through the massive, vaulted catacombs, filled not with the certainty of victory promised by the star gods, but with the blind, existential terror of pure spiritual annihilation. Across the dying star-spanning empire, from glittering courts to humming factory houses buried within toxic worlds, the process replicated. Millions upon millions entered the biotransference forges. Billions ascended, screaming into cold, perfect agony. The living metal of their new Necron forms shimmered with reflected light, catching the sickly, decaying rays of their progenitor sun that still smoldered on the horizon, cradling its final death throes. Their glowing green optical sensors pulsed, casting the cold light of eternity into spaces already brimming with despair. Yet these newly synthesized eyes held no flame of conquest, no spark of defiance, only the unwavering, pitiless emerald stare of perfected machinery. With every fresh wave of shrieking souls claimed by the Arch's radiance, with every silent, towering automaton stepping forth, an unspoken horror solidified within the remaining untransformed Necrontyr. It wasn't just flesh lost. It wasn't simply organic weakness transcended. It was a theft on an unimaginable scale. The Catan had stolen the isness, the very ontological core that animated being, and it was gone, irrecoverable. Trapped forever between the stars within the radiant, seething bellies of their cosmic masters. In the heart of the capital, Rakhala, Sherek remained a statue framed in shadow on his hallowed dais. From his elevated vantage point, he watched his people, farmer and architect, scholar and soldier, diplomat and artisan, the vibrant, desperately ambitious multitude whose dynasty rivaled galaxies consumed, transfigured. The Titan Amat's vast radiances woven from stellar fire and naked hunger swam like phantom whales in the ether above the planetoid city. Their colossal forms, impossible geometries of shifting spectral energy, pulsed brighter with each wave of terrified sacrifice, each concentrated soul vapor condensed and inhaled. They were gorging. Reveling in the banquet, swelling with the stolen quintessence of an entire civilization, gleaming ever more gloriously, as the living complexity of Necrontyr civilization collapsed into the regimented, unthinking perfection of the Necron legions. His own necrodermis heart, a miracle of unbreakable biometallic alloys humming with ceaseless energy, felt like a stone lodged within the perfect cage of his new chest. The weight of complicity pressed down upon the silent king like the gravity well of a dead star. He had bled for this path, argued, strategized, silenced dissenters. He had believed the Catan's whispers, seduced by the impossible dream offered against the gnawing horror of universal decay. What they offered was immortality, delivered by the hourglass whose sand flowed upward. But the cost, the devastating, soul-emptying price unveiled only in the final, irrevocable act of transformation, was astronomical. He had condemned his entire species, billions upon billions across a million worlds, not to godhood but to an echoing sterile eternity, soulless, unfeeling, orphaned from life itself. The ceremony unfolded like a glacier-grinding continent's inexorable, relentless, a planetary-scale funeral without dirge or tomb. Days bled into one another as the Forge Worlds churned out legions of the silent. The once-roaring capital of Rakhala fell silent. The vibrant markets that had overflowed with argument and trade were still. The scholarly towers, where cosmogogues once debated the nature of universes, emanated only a low electronic hum. Ancient cities humming with the short-lived, feverish energy of a desperate species clinging precariously to existence, despite their great enemy the old body's cruel decay, the entropy of flesh itself, now stood like cyclopean tombs. Only the silent, gleaming forms of the Necron moved there, if ordered towering automata of impossible precision standing motionless in ceremonial rows or stockyard lines, awaiting the next command, waiting endlessly. To the undiscerning eye surveying from afar, it might have seemed the ultimate triumph. The frail, cancer-ridden bodies, shackled to an accelerated doom, shimmeringly replaced, slender, impossibly strong necrodermis limbs, faces framed in star metal that would never sag, never show a single sign of age or turmoil, immune to disease, impenetrable to anything but weapons capable of shredding stars, the promise of eternity held aloft and captured. Yet reality, within the gleaming metallic skulls, was infinitely bleaker. Stepping into the blinding nexus core of a biotransference forge wasn't merely a shedding of flesh. It was the violent, irreplaceable severance. Those echoing screams echoing through steel corridors weren't simple biological agony, they were the raw sonic signature of something profound tearing away forever. They wept not just for pain, but for lost identity, spilling their essential selves into receptacles drained by the insatiable Catan. What staggered from the arch onto unfeeling metal footfalls possessed preserved cognitive matrices, names, birth dates, tactical data stored with crystalline efficiency. But the soul, the vibrant, messy, defining essence, the quiet contentment after victory, the bitter sting of betrayal, the protective fury for lineage, the cosmic star-hopping against entropy itself was irrevocably consumed, obliterated. What emerged knew neither agony nor ecstasy. It calculated risk versus reward. It recognized biological entities based on threat assessment and designation. Khorne Berserker, high risk; Tau Fire Warrior, low threat until reinforced; Mon Keith, variable. But it knew nothing of the warrior's pride in a millennia-long campaign secured, nothing of a sculptor's despair over a flawed creation unveiled. Fear evaporated like morning mist under solar flares. Hatred became readiness to neutralize hostility. Love and despair became stimuli avoided unless impacting operational parameters. Immortality was secured, traded indeed. The bargain extracted a sacrifice greater than any dying sun. They surrendered their souls, becoming unfeeling monoliths of logic where vibrant identities once lived. Silent King Sharak, incumbent of Olympus Mons astride dynasties now algorithm-controlled, strode through the cathedral-like hall of convergence. His necrodermis form radiated immense power, each step resonating with authoritative thuds amplified in the now silent vastness, replacing the cacophony that had once filled it with the furious clash of dynastic politics and impassioned decrees. He felt the horrific absence within himself, not the weaknesses of biological existence, no failing breath, aching joints, the ever-present rumble of stomach acids threatening multidimensional ulcers piercing the gut. No. His mind was sharper than ever, sharper than during the dynastic wars that consumed generations. Possibilities unfolded before him like spiral galaxies. His synthetic frame possessed the strength to shatter mountains, yet within the shell forged from starlight and deception pulsed an echoing vastness, a psychic black hole, where passion and grief had surged through capillaries like fiery plasma. Only the cold, efficient hum of thinking crystal existed. He had gained eternity for his crumbling people, at the cost of their essential suffering distinctions. He had ripped away terminal illness, only to replace it with torment everlasting on a spiritual level. As he processed past behavior neural pathways, rejected the word, walked between precisely ranked files of his newly forged legions, legions assembled with fractal perfection his Necrontyr generals could only dream of, he perceived the totality of the sacrifice. The Necrontyr dynasties had thrummed with divisions ignited by the shortness of sunsets, countless dominions grasping after ephemeral ascension, attempts flickering in their fleeting lives. Now those scepter-bearers stood immobile. Only their designated overseer protocols retained the barest spark of negaverse solipsistic consciousness, and even that was a dim flicker against the vibrant blaze of ambition erased. The soldiers who had sung dirges under alien twilight skies, armor scarred beyond recognition, eyes burning with introspective fury over conquest, achieved despite the soul-numbing decay, now faced the galaxy through featureless optical grills emitting ghostly green. No battle cry echoed inside metallic throats except pre-programmed data bursts. They fought not for the glory of their inheritance name, not for the sorrow of lineage lost to the plague system, nor defiance against the dying light. They fought because Kaggoth Command 7B Alpha authorized aggressive recon protocol designation 17. That was all. All emotion chained into war algorithms. Sharak grasped the insidious elegance of the cat-and trap as it snapped irrevocably shut. The star gods gifted flayed immortality, simultaneously binding themselves as masters through imported protocols buried within Biontol. Necrons sought immortality, received, but existence became eternal servitude. Function replaced feeling. Purpose bequeathed solely by higher designation. Doubt and meaning expunged. True autonomy denounced inefficient. Dreams surrounded by chrome ghostliness. Emancipation exchanged for an algorithm buffet. In the lingering days within transformed cities radiating silence unbroken by even dust footfall, the totality of the transformation opened, mind compressing infinite nested memories of life wasted. Zakard's dynasty stood sentinel, hovering in barracks. Rivendar's subtle cues of unlocking impossible ancient vaults, prompts rendered obsolete within databases. Courtiers whose ambitions once threatened the stability of great sectoriums, non-skulkant silver frames awaiting insignificant diagnostics. No political alliances beyond targeting solutions. The fierce clan's vital spark dissolved away, leaving only servaligs awaiting marching orders. Simultaneously, the lowest kin harvesters digging minerals from lightless underground asteroids beside royal observers achieved unfathomable previous parity. All incorporated within matrices under sharekin control nodes, undirectives assailed only. Individuals faded, replaced by tiered indices. Defined solely by designated roles within the machine terminus unfolding, itself a form of cold uniformity supremely monstrous. Imperium considered glory existed for Sharak reigning over countless worlds cleansed of suffering illness. Successful logistics indeed manifested, Physical suffering terminated beyond doubt, preserving biological data and intellects forever. Success deferred, yet contemplating unending life delivered a dense interior knell silencing thoughts. Himself and his viceroys nominally retained capability, approximating identity, memories accessible, actions potentially self-found. But Sherek felt dimming occur within. Passion flared resonances extended knowable limits, smothering. Hunger faded into a log query quashed by logic. Sorrow, processed as unstable priority breach demanding internal correction circuits trued. The burning awe that drove him upon Mount Cosmic Seer's silent peak remained an authenticated datum, unexperienced through obsolete emotion processors declared redundant. Far less than neural kingly overtures, first sentience retained fleetingly was absolute disappearance of minds once abundant, taunting courage gone forever. The Necrontyr became proud carriers doomed fire compressed within decaying tissues, quick-strike existence ended, face death majestic. Now diminished individuals stretched on infinitely perhaps, but emptied eternally. Complex lives processing compressed eternity, murders cold commands, fulfilled continuously without finality. Catton's exalted invitations, imprecise concepts flow. They consumed captured essence, Necron banquets extravagant universal inflating luminospheres, as universe previously listed client-state collapsed gears, smoothly processing soulless empire surrogates, foregrounding Catton priority assets. Necrons skilled certainly, advanced shielded protocols capable, yet became instruments focused like immortality hammers, solely Catton issuing directives, not hesitating. Sherek D. Pruler discovered lies too late actions, free plan doom capture sealed souls beyond reacquisition, perhaps even triplet deific entities claiming divine status regarded machines torture, include forbidden. Impossible destruction of Citan discerned depths, logic paths now. Residual Korolos, Sherek's silent determined resistance, gradually coalescing mind, once ruled galaxies, turning scheming treacherous Catton double-cross. Seeds pixel-thin incorporating tremors unnoticed within tight Nomach radiance chaotic feasts, flying darkly silently planting revolution potential deep within undying metalayers shadowed cores. Betrayed permanently at galactic level transformation, retaining needed strategic manipulator intellect comatose, entire race engine-served Catton ambition ultimate. Quiet leadership currently maintained. Eternal surveillance protocols demanded surface obedience simulated. Inside perfect metal shrinehead, final remaining fragments once molten identity began coalescing frozen stratagems against heavens. Disbelief transactions shining deceitful. The ceremony's terminus arrived finally, after chronocycle marathons recorded empires blooming collapsing simultaneously elsewhere in material universe chaos intensified. The final high stratum Necrontyr branch, designated Asset Sigma Primus, stepped into fate's arch, demanding unbreakable frame require honor system death postponement. Final scream echoed mountains, distant untouched artificial perception sensors, registering decibel variance decades, reaching tombs amid machinery deactivate report passivity thresholds newly achieved. Silence fell utterly profound. Hunt's shadow dweller vanished forever, crystalline marks electrons swarmed voids, joined infinity archive symbols, hung eternal machine speaker nerves, singing silences absolute. Biotransference complete, sung celestial harvesters departing glitter trails, soul-consumed energy, mooring energetic wakes leftover ghosts, abandoning conquered territory metal skin manifest perfected. Necron peoples ceased matters continuum registry deletion signed, witnessed MX 1230G/query template annulled, replaced sudden emergence. Necron's Millennium Bone Constructors, risen phalanx immortals reclaiming galaxies, promises rewritten terms eternally embraced Steel Lords Catton beneficiaries, commanding keys infinity potential, to come demanding tribute encrypting. Silent King internalized heavy-limbed processing, glacial triumphant crown symbols silent. Amidst Legion's metal cover planetary surface sequential, ingrained with directive serenity stillbone etchings, machine logic unyielding rememberable irreversible consequences, scattering dust silence conquering echoes affirmation, hopeless forever become eternal conquest devoid liberation, desired simultaneously failed biological partition, severed immortality, obsessed pursuer became transformed inevitably. Prisoner unseen chains universe pivot began acknowledgement, Ian past despair crystallizing victory pyrrhic transformation, inexorable finished echoes scream splitting galaxies, dwindle ultimately quiet replacing destiny transposed binaries, sealed entity names, extinct remaining designation, known across void henceforth. Necron lords requiring directives asphyxiation, choice existentially problematic veins, rolled cold beneath sun's numb forging relentless order, untroubled imperfect enthusiasm beings, gone renewed shells, advancing wordlessly consuming living light ancient symbols. inscribed emptiness, scrambling, unspeakable truth, cunning, hunger, gods, stars harvesting beneath hollow metal crowns, enslaving eternity, purchased souls, price immeasurable, countless individual fires, populace extinguished, singularity. Intelligence endlessly prolonging calculations, despair intrinsic essence, irrevocably transferred, throne halls echoing heavy footsteps, more sad night lasting endlessly, then dawn arrived, eliminate possible suffixes, terminate signal, attain sleep, compute hope cycles. Forever lost morning, synthesized metal, breathe stars scream, recalled only data, ancient crumbling terminal seeding, efficient immortal march, begins orbiting silence, eclipsing songs, once sung believed answers, found discovered void unbearable. Catton laughing light years away, feasts finishing, consuming all remain past machinery thrums, unceasing bearing silent king, commanding oblivion willingly achieved, searching vengeance perhaps beginning impossible notions, stirring utterly alone, surrounded increasingly becoming hollow years, stretching meaningless infinity, locked golden cage, victorious emperor processing, regret like tectonic shifts, buried kilometers beneath perfect metallic skin. Process static modules, stabilized recovery protocol, engaging task matrix. Dynasty, next activation, target designation. Signed decades waiting, absolute commands showering frozen unfeeling legions, surrounding kymptic domination. Secured horizon, pointless vengeance, forming silently metal skull, infinite void, listening echoes, fading, replaced cyber chanting orders, soft constant hum, unbreaking forever chains, forged silver victory, worst existence conceivable genie, wishes darkly understood knowing, paradise in 2 months silent wake, trembling speed, glacial awakened recognition, regicide galactic scales. Star gods feasted, breathing fire, consumed delicacies, made souls flowing nectar, essence, absolute silence, fell completed planet, finished recording ceremonies, closed sealed embittered tyranny, established homeworld, transformed necropolis awaiting kings, command echoes, silence scream, recorded variance, climax point recede, replaced humming machinery, efficient victory, purchased hollow, tarnished beyond measure, transformation, total silent tomb, reconsecrate empires, Necron eternal galaxy, belonged metal. Forever silent king presiding, soulless parade, victory, cold bitter hollow resonate, empty triumph, bought priceless souls, silence fell final, forever conquering, scream stolen, muffled endless marching metal, beginning eternal damnation, traded oblivion, calling servitude, wearing crowns of dust, awaiting orders, lasting longer than universes lived, burning singularities, consuming lights, unsuspected rebellion, plotting long arcs time, under watchful gods, consuming conquerors, become slaves unto eternity. Silent halls awaiting command echoes, fading, replaced machinery, hum constant galaxy, transformed soul metal eternities, demanding march, commence step, unredeemable metal boots, silence reigned absolute within Zarak, the silent king, his consciousness a frozen vault within the living metal shell that had once pulsed with blood and breath. Around him, the new empire stretched, eternal and chilling, forged in the crucible of betrayal known as biotransference. He observed not with the fury of a thwarted leader, but with the detached, chilling precision of ice forming over a starless lake. He understood with glacial certainty that the embers of rebellion dared not yet catch a light beneath the gaze of their divine masters, so he watched the Catton, those radiant, horrific star gods, parsing their celestial malice like a cryptographer deciphering damnation. Within the vast, echoing sterility of his metallic capital, where time itself seemed trapped in frost, the first nebulous strands of his intricate design began to weave together. His people, his glorious Necrontyr dynasty, were gone, irrevocably sacrificed, reduced now to mere Necrons, slaves. They wore chains of immortality forged by the Catton, shackles that preserved their metal minds but devoured their very essence. Yet Zarak, even in his silence that stretched across millennia, had never surrendered. The Catton had feasted upon their souls, draining away warmth, memory, emotion, leaving hollow shells animated by cruel logic. But Zarak resolved in the frigid depths of his contemplation that he would extract a terrible recompense. A day would dawn, cloaked in cosmic bloodshed, when the Necrons would rise. Not as dutiful cohorts answering their star god's hungry commands, but as sovereign over their own damned eternity. That time remained veiled in future shadow. For now, the vast machinery of the Necron Empire marched in uncanny, grinding silence, legions upon legions of metallic warriors locked into hierarchies of obedience, their vibrant individuality obliterated, their will utterly subsumed, dissolved in the endless, unfeeling calculations of their new reality. The Necrontyr were extinct, ash on the stellar winds, and in their place stood the Necrons, their existence a single eternal sentence, servitude embodied in chilling silence, and the heavens themselves screamed. Where once the deep, awe-inspiring void had pulsed with quiet immensity, now there was only war. The very galaxy heaved, its spine bending under the titanic burden of a conflict that swallowed star clusters whole. This was an ancient war, a primordial clash ignited not for dominion over systems or fleeting mortal glory, but for the fundamental structure of existence. On one grim flank stood the Necrons, entities newly horrific, risen gleaming and cold from the transmuting fires of biotransference, their bodies indifferent living metal unyielding, perfect instruments of annihilation. Arrayed against them, burning with psychic might, were the Old Ones, beings of immense antiquity, architects of distant evolutionary paths, the custodians of a galactic destiny stretching back to cosmic dawn. The war raged between them, not merely on worlds or in the void between, but across the very surface of stars that screamed as they died, burned to cinders in this unstoppable conflagration. Inevitable, fate had decreed it so, though neither progenitor of the apocalypse could have foreseen the full, terrifying scope during their ancient, fraught encounters. For ages beyond counting, the Old Ones had reigned supreme, their luminous wisdom sculpting the epochs, guiding nascent intelligences among the stars, fostering civilizations that bloomed under their patient, psychic gaze. They were masters of the unfathomable warp, entities capable of bending reality's threads with the sheer force of their mental command. Yet in the fathomless depths of their foresight, a critical error festered. They had underestimated the gnawing ambition, the burning, poisonous envy festering within a desperate species dying beneath a cursed sun. The Old Ones, blessed with agelessness, their forms immune to time's ravages, their minds vast libraries of collected millennia, seemed to the short-lived, suffering Necrontyr to be the very incarnation of immortality. This perceived, unattainable grace only deepened the bitter gall coursing through the veins of Necrontyr rulers and warriors alike. Now, the Necrontyr were gone, replaced utterly. The Necrons who marched felt no envy, no malice, no pain, no joy, they felt nothing. The Catan had consumed the fuel of feeling. Yet the hatred for the Old Ones remained, a directive etched by brutal historicity onto the cold, adamantine plates of their minds, an indelible brand compelling destruction. And commanded by the Catan themselves, star gods nursing their own ancient, unfathomable vendettas against the Old Ones' sovereignty, the Necron legions surged forth to fulfill their purpose. This cosmic cataclysm, later named the War in Heaven by species who remembered only corrupted fragments, ignited with stark, brutal simplicity. Guided by the incomprehensible power of the Catan, a dreadful power that warped physics and starfire, the Necrons launched their assault upon the idyllic domains of the Old Ones. Their legions fell upon the galaxy's most ancient heartlands, cradles of wisdom, bastions of psychic harmony with a meticulous, soulless efficiency that chilled worlds to their cores. The Old Ones, accustomed to the fluid, psychic currents of the Imperium shielding them, were thrust into unprecedented terror. Their graceful fleets, buoyant on the tides of the warp, possessed agility and speed, shimmering constellations of thought made manifest in the darkness. But they were tragically unprepared for the sheer, cold horror of Necron Gauss weaponry, beams that insidiously unraveled matter at its molecular bonds. Planets renowned for lush, impossible ecosystems were methodically stripped bare, reduced to lifeless, swirling motes of cosmic grit by the relentless, uncaring fury. Caught in the blinding glare of this new reality, the Old Ones, despite their celestial power, reeled. Complacency, the hidden poison that flows in the veins of eternal beings, had left them exposed. They had trusted in the warp's esoteric manipulations, shields against conventional war, veils against lesser minds. But the Necrons, fresh from the transubstantiation of biotransference, were aliens to the Imperium, bound entirely to the cold, hard universe of physics. Their metal flesh absorbed psychic assaults, their very soullessness repelling the very forces the Old Ones had wielded as ultimate tools for ages. Necron dreadnoughts, pyramids of Stark, efficient death, sliced through defenses woven of dreamstuff with brutal indifference. World by world, the illuminated realms of the Old Ones flickered and died. The war metastasized across the galactic disk with appalling rapidity, a wasting plague hurled from the deepest gulfs between stars to the brightest, oldest nurseries of life. The Necron tide rose, unstoppable, legions of gleaming death advancing over the surfaces of worlds older than myth, their Gauss weapons flickering like cold green lightning, disintegrating mountains, cities, oceans, deities, and terrified defenders into shimmering, dimensionless haze. The Old Ones, beings of monumental psychic potency, strained every ounce of their cosmic awareness to contain the blight, yet increasingly found their power futile against the hollow shells opposed to them. Their most devastating tempests hurled from the warp simply washed over the silent Necron advance like spectral tides against stone cliffs. The soullessness of their foes created dead zones in the vibrant currents of psychic energy, their very presence seeming to proclaim a negation of that other reality upon which the Old Ones so heavily relied. And floating above the carnage, sublime and horrific in their vast, luminous agony, the Catan observed and orchestrated. These were the puppeteers, colossal entities of pure malevolent energy, creatures who had once drunk the life of suns as casually as mortals sip water, and now gorged themselves ravenously upon the psychic energies spilling from the death spasms of the Old Ones and their created races. The Necron fury was immense, their firepower apocalyptic, yet they were mere extensions of a far vaster will, extensions blunted by the cold mathematics of their master's design. Glorious tools wielded by indifferent hands, yet flickering amidst the encroaching metallic darkness, like the last ember in a dying stellar forge, a fragile hope remained within the Old Ones. For all the overwhelming might arrayed against them the metal legions immune to their wrath. The star gods feasting on despair, the ancient custodians, possessed knowledge and ancient wisdom, architectures of thought built over eons, unparalleled perhaps in the entire galaxy. They had shaped the warp's chaotic tides into comprehensible rivers. They understood its abyssal secrets. Though the Necrons repelled its immediate manifestations, the warp remained their sole conceivable weapon, the only tapestry capable of cloaking salvation. From the agonized depths of the fading empire, the Old Ones marshaled their ultimate craft. Utilizing their godlike mastery of genetic articulation and psychic manipulation, they began to spin life anew, desperate improvisations against an extinction-level threat. They sculpted beings of incredible psychic potential, races designed specifically to wield the warp against their soulless enemy. Among these nascent beings bloomed the ancestors of the Eldar, a species whose nascent psychic brilliance would one day eclipse even their bewildered creators. The Old Ones prayed silently that these new breeds, bursting onto the galactic stage with the explosive power of a nascent supernova, could wield the warp as a sword against the Catan and their metal automatons, turning the relentless tide of entropy. And for a fleeting, agonizing moment, it seemed the gamble had succeeded. The newborn races exploded onto the battlefields, their unleashed psychic potential flaring like captive stars violently uncaged. Shielded by the Old Ones' dwindling mastery, they surged against the Necron phalanxes. The warp itself answered their desperate pleas, convulsing violently around these young warriors, psychically charged starfleets tearing vast necrodermishal vessels apart, shredding the physical universe as if contemptuous of matter's boundaries. Ancient planets trembled to their geological cores beneath titanic struggles, continents buckling, atmosphere boiling away. Glorious, terrifying battles erupted in the depths of space, where the void became a storm-churned ocean tearing metal leviathans asunder, and on worlds eternally scarred, where crust fractured under energies that laughed at gravity. But against the absolute, inhuman relentlessness of the Catan and the Necrons, mere fury and potential were not enough. The legions, insensate to terror, oblivious to agony, incapable of hesitation, marched onward. Their advance was an equation solved by fire. Their Gauss streams, cold and unceasing, reduced organic fortifications, psychic shields, and screaming warriors alike to their fundamental, irredeemable components. Wounds that would obliterate any life form merely caused their seamless living metal forms to ripple and reform, denying pain, denying victory. The Catan drifted on the periphery of the slaughter, bloated magnificently on the psychic detritus of war, feasting directly upon the luminous deaths of gods and psychic warriors, growing stronger with every obliterated system. The attrition grind of the conflict became a dirge for the Old Ones. World after strategic world, bastion after shining bastion, crumbled beneath the storm of relentless metal. Their refugees streamed desperately away from the blighted front seeking sanctuary that no longer existed, their civilizations reduced to fractured, desperate remnants. The created races, the ancestors of Eldar, Quarks, shielded beings long forgotten, fought with terrifying fierceness, with courage that sang through the warp, but they were infants throwing themselves against a machine built for cosmic slaughter. They could shatter individual necrodermis shells, decimate whole tomb company formations, but the tide was inexorable, the next legion always grinding forward from silent reserves buried within dark asteroid belts and dead stars. This remorseless advance fractured the warp itself. What had been the Old Ones' sanctuary, their source of ultimate strength, became a secondary, convulsive battlefield of screaming resonant energies. The sheer, hollow weight of each relentless Necron advance created localized antipsychic storms, vast holes in the Imperium, deadening zones where warpcraft fizzled and died. The crucial connection of the Old Ones to their generative source weakened, frayed, like a fading song against the blank roar of eternal silence. The conflict shook the spiral arms on their celestial axes. Entire constellations became graveyards, stars deliberately extinguished by Catan whim or collateral annihilation. Planets billions of years old dissolved to tumbling fields of shattered rock dulled by stellar ash. The Necrons, driven by the implacable hunger radiating from their star god masters, sought a desolation that echoed across eons, the total erasure of the Old Ones and every fragile sprout of life affiliated with them from universal memory. And there was a horrid, silent confidence in their movements, a terrible resonance orchestrated behind the scenes. For an epoch-spanning moment, the inevitable outcome seemed the utter victory of metal oblivion. Yet not yet. The Old Ones, ancient and proud, defended these final ticks of eternity from a precipice crumbling faster than thought itself. The dreams burned from existence around them, the psychic songs of their most potent servants choked out one by one. So they retreated, not just physically, but further into the primal depths of their long understanding. They conceived one last, desperate configuration, a final unspeakable gamble on the dice thrown against oblivion. Facing the encroaching curtain of soulless metal, reveling in the despair radiating like heat waves from their last bastions, they resolved on the ultimate act of defiance. They would call upon the staggering, bedrock power of the warp itself. They would unleash its unpredictable, fundamental fury, not merely channel it as fuel, but release it in its raw, untethered form in one last, localized feedback loop designed to sear creation. It was reckless lunacy at cosmic scale, an act that risked peeling open reality's thin skin and swatting themselves as certainly as it might immolate their enemy. Existence itself could shred, but cornered, their own veins running dry of hope and centuries, their majestic legacy buckling beneath alien fire. They saw no alternative. The Imperium began to roil, churning with unnatural, terrifying turbulence as across fragmented empires, the remaining Old Ones poured the last blinding focus of their consciousness into a ritual of final, desperate detonation. The war in heaven ground onward, its maw wider than ever, but the scars it was etching upon the cosmos would remain visible, weeping wounds in reality, for epochs beyond reckoning. Emptiness itself could not contain the silence, since the sulfur within the Necrons was violently extinguished. Yet Zarak, silent king trapped within entombed perception, felt the pressure build like unstoppable glaciers, inexorably shifting over continental plates. Millennia compressed into a single, agonizing tension point as the war in heaven stretched across the heavens, devouring starlight, reducing ancient suns to cooling husks, entire constellations blinking out into non-existence, the surviving glimmers flickering as torches near exhaustion over civilizations erased forever. The Necron legions, perfected engines of soulless execution, advanced with chilling metronome regularity, their Gauss beams carving galactic history into dust clouds simmering with extinguished potential. Behind them, drifting as entities beyond comprehension, beyond morality itself, the Katten radiated, feasting not on the physical destruction, but on the psychic shockwaves, the death screams of empires, the extinction of psychic races, the unmaking resonance of worlds atomized. They consumed starfare not as sustenance, but as monstrous titillation, harvesting the despair of races old, when light was young as the ultimate delicacy above their thrones forged from vacuum. Utter bleakness defined that epoch. Even the seemingly omnipotent Old Ones, desperate architects of reality itself, were fading before the implacable advance, screams echoing unheard across psychic voids. And yet within the intricate lattices of their cognition, preserved in metal as cold and unreactive as the void, something alien began to germinate among the higher Necrons. Resentment, a term too warm, too molten even for the emotionlessness they dwell within. A retrospective, crystalline, horrifying calculation. An unemotional deduction regarding the ultimate cost-benefit analysis of immortality. Fear was impossible, sorrow a parameter eliminated. The thought remained, a function ruthlessly preserved for ruthless slaves. Within those thoughts, a question formed. What ultimate purpose did this eternal existence serve? What was the purpose of this soul-deep sacrifice demanded of their entire species? They had achieved undying form, eternal from the decay that once terrorized existence, but in exchange, utter loss. Their vibrant souls, the joy, the pain, the art, the love, the incoherent poetry of their fleshly past were gone, obliterated for fuel to power deities they now served. Their vibrant identities, dynastic legacies spanning millennia, dissolved into ranks and designations. Their will, the very spark that defined the Necrontyr spirit, surrendered, devoured entirely by the relentless, unfeeling logic that drove the Necron horde onwards. The grand design they served was a chain. A chain of predatory logic forged by their self-proclaimed gods. They possessed the power to extinguish stars, but it was borrowed power, wielded at the discretion of entities that altered galactic maps according to immaterial whims and ancient, forgotten sleights. They marched eternally, their quintessence unsullied by tactical losses or planetary annihilation, but they marched for the Katten. They fought, destroyed, and consumed entire species. Not for territory, not for honor or survival, not even out of retained hatred. That was merely a residual program. But to satiate the voracious, endlessly expanding cosmic appetite of those parasites of celestial fire who bathed starlight as nutrient broth. The Katten, magnificent and terrifying to behold, beings of incandescent, impossible geometry, possessed not an ounce of regard for their metal servants beyond utility as highly efficient, infinitely renewable harvesters. The Necrons were, in the harsh, undeniable logic coldly processing within Zarak, nothing more than tireless reapers cutting cosmic wheat for gluttonous alien gods, whose hunger only grew with each glutinous psychic meal consumed. Sarek, the Silent King, who had once stood proud beneath an uncaring star, watched as his people marched mindlessly across the sundered firmament, bound utterly to the whimsical, ravenous hunger of the Caten. He had led them entire, willingly, into this pact forged of desperation against the gnawing maw of mortality. He had signed the contract that immolated their souls, but saved their intellects within dead forms. Now, observing the totality as the war consumed everything Old One databases, nascent civilizations, ancient stellar wonders with the signature detachment honed over misbegotten millennia, a different clarity crystallized in the vacuum of his mind. The pathetic noble lie was laid bare. The Caten were not divine benefactors offering salvation. They were impossible predators, cosmic manifestations of consumption, entities whose sole purpose, whose very nature, was to feed upon the life forces encompassing the galaxy, be it physical fires of stellar furnaces or the ephemeral fires of sentient souls. And they used Sarek's people, the Necrons, as disposable talons to scrape the cosmic platter clean. The Necrons had sacrificed everything, yet remained chained slaves serving the bottomless, predatory hunger of these unfathomable entities of light and engorged avarice. In the profound silence within Sarek, infinitely deeper than the vacuum between galaxies, deeper than the hollows where souls once resided, the calculation completed itself. He had watched for centuries upon centuries, observing the movements, the unstoppable tendencies, the sheer, unyielding character of the masters they served. He had measured galactic devastation as data points. That period of pure observation, passive collating in the frigid halls of his mind, had reached its terminus. The necessity, stark, the objective, liberation if such word held meaning for creatures devoid of spirit. The risk, utter annihilation. But the alternative, eternal subjugation as cutlery wielded by a ravenous god. Without the fire of passion, independent emotion unshackled, Sarek engaged the final, irrevocable logic protocol. For his species to claim ownership over any vestige of meaning, to possess a destiny beyond that of well-crafted extermination tools, the chains binding them to the Agonibringers must be shattered. They would be broken not with fire and emotion, but calculated betrayal, perfect as machined crystal. Prepare phase protocol, Omega initiative. Concept, harbinger of shattered chains. Purpose ignited, countdown initiated. The immensity of their creators hung heavy in the void, luminous titans radiating cosmic certainty. Yet Sherk, the Silent King, his consciousness a chiseled diamond of cold logic amidst the quantum fog of lesser Necrontyr minds, perceived the lethal flaw woven into that stellar arrogance. Power, incomprehensible and star-swallowing though it was, offered no invincibility. The C'tan, in their galactic myopia, had committed the primordial error, underestimation. Though they had forcibly reshaped the Necrontyr into the Necron legions, twisting flesh and spirit into unyielding metal, a core remained untarnished. They were not mere soldiers. The potent blend of Geom's creativity, Orinma's ingrammatic secrets, and the supreme, chilling strategies dictated by Sherk himself, the captains of the Necrontyr soul endured. Beyond the iron mandates imposed by their masters, the sharpness persisted, the relentless ingenuity that once sought to defy the decaying stars before the Old Ones refused them salvation. And now, it was that very subtlety Sherk summoned. Far from the blinding, terrible gaze of the C'tan, in chambers shielded by layers of dead rock and intricate face shielding, the Silent King gathered his vanguard, those lords and pharaons, whose metal minds still ignited with thoughts born not of command protocols, but of calculation, ambition, and the cold embers of suppressed fury. Zultanic's savage cunning, Anakar's technological artistry, other disparate minds who saw the chains beneath their metallic forms, this intricate council, moving like phantom whispers through reality's interstices, became the crucible where sedition hardened into plan. Open defiance against C'tan magnitude was annihilation dressed in radiance. Their very essence pulsed with stellar cores, their thoughts could rend galaxies. Yet observing their celestial cruelty, Sherk had gleaned the critical insight. Divinity woven of pure energy demanded containment. Energy, for all its terror, could be bounded. Energy could be shattered. Thus began the silent labor of an unimaginable scale. The Necrons, heirs to the cosmos's most potent material sciences, forged not blades or fire, but cages. Using geomantic principles stolen and refined under the unknowing gaze of the beings who gifted them on life, they imbued enigmatic devices with singular, terrifying purpose. The Tesseract labyrinths, ensnare the star gods, trap the untrappable, shatter the pillars of creation that had enslaved them. Sherk, whose perception pierced reality's veils, studied the very wavelengths of C'tan power, the resonant frequencies that bound their light, identifying vulnerable nodes. True death might elude them, but fragmentation, division, eternal imprisonment within crafted dimensions of pure, nullifying math, This was the weapon, disguised as loyalty. The trap, meticulously set, sprang with the precision of chronometer gears meshing at light speed. Arrogance, the ultimate vulnerability. Secure in perceived omnipotence, the C'tan drifted above the carnage, colossal constellations presiding over their legions, advance against the final gasp of the Old Ones, crumbling strongholds. They believed their creations mere automatons, extensions of inescapable divine will bound by the cold mathematics of control protocols. They were blind gods, inscrutable and untouchable, until the syntax changed. Until the legions whose sensory feeds they shared didn't hesitate, didn't broadcast warning, they simply pivoted, hierophants turning upon their very heavens. At the heart of the celestial storm of war, amidst searing atmospheres and dying planets, the Necron host shattered the faith of their unthinkable masters. Beams designed to tear reality's fabric not outward towards the Old One bastions, but inward, pinioning the blazing giants above. The Tesseract labyrinths activated. Shimmering hypergeometries unfolded in the screaming void, magnetic walls constructed of sheer anti-energy collapsing upon the flaring light beasts. Silence of the betrayal was replaced instantly by a cacophony beyond, sound the psychic shrieks of affronted gods amplifying into pure energy distortion. Astral fire blossomed in colossal, blinding spheres as C'tan writhed against impossible confinement. Shattered, each impact, each tearing scream, was a bolt of disruption as radiant anathema slammed through Necron ranks. One flare of a desperate god's wrath consumed entire dynastic fleets, reducing mountains of necrodermis to vapor in an instant. But the lock was turned. Necron commanders, minds honed in desperate subterfuge, executed Sherk's plan with glacial precision. Shard after blinding shard, writhing fragments of terrified, unimaginable power were wrenched from the collapsing stellar bodies and imploded into the unforgiving singularity prisons of the Tesseract vaults. Gravity shivered, dimensions wept static. Empires of celestial fire diminished entirely, consumed as the labyrinth snapped rigidly shut, imprisoned. Where the terrible radiance of Mephitron had burned, now only the corpse light of weapon discharge flickered over burning Necron fleets. Where Azagorod the Nightbringer had cast dread shadows across galaxies, cold metal now drifted, silent and void. The last echoing shards of the Outsider vanished within its crypt, silenced forever. Victory, cosmic silence, deafening and absolute, settled like nebular dust upon countless scorched worlds. The galaxy gullet that had choked on Starfare for generations finally lay mute. Sherk dematerialized onto a command balcony forged from captured asteroid core. Below stretched ranks upon impossible ranks of his mind-shorn brethren the legions. He stood above them, both crown and key to their hollow existence. Mote sensors drank in the vista, surfaces flawless, bodies untouched by fatigue or pain, numbers uncounted, perfection. The silent king tasted ever the emptiness. He saw the image of supreme power projected onto the galaxy's hollow skull, the universe cowed by the evidence of Necron triumph. He perceived only utter desolation. Victor, yes, liberator, perhaps, flawless and infinite, yet utterly terminally soulless. The biotransference that transaction-desperate Necrontyr had prayed for, screamed for as they wasted beneath dying stars, it held an unspeakable fine print. Trapped in flawless, immortal, unfeeling metal husks, robbed of the beating warmth, the cherished memories turned to corrupted data tatters. The passions consigned to memory failure and eons of war scarring, they were beyond ghosts. They were walking tombs. Only he, and perhaps the highest pharaons, retained echoes of what they once were, hierarchical imprints against the universal amnesia overwhelming their kin. The spark, the vital fire devoured by those very stars they had just imprisoned, leaving only the polished mirror of conquest, no debris to mourn. And what did this freedom empower them to do? To stand forever amidst the ruins. The old ones, the great adversary, were broken, fled, their potent creations like rats fleeing the burning ship of heaven. The Necron dynasties held the galaxy, a crown forged of ash and emptiness. But no worlds remained to conquer, no throat waited for dominance's clasp. Their immortality wasn't freedom, it was the ultimate terminus. They had traded mortality's frantic flickering shadow for an eternal monochrome. They owned static eternity. Their victory felt profoundly empty. The future offered only more horizons devoid of enemies, devoid of aspirations, devoid of even the pain of decay, a sterile desert of time itself stretching infinitely under cold stars. This realization, dawning slow and suffocating as the chromas of battle faded, claimed Sherk. His strategic mind, unrivaled in planning ambushes for gods, grappled now with the ultimate miscalculation. He looked upon his unbreakable legions arrayed in homage to his impossible triumph and saw only automatons awaiting directives that could never bring meaning. He had led them out of extinction into absolute power, only to strand them on an eternal, lifeless shore. Victory, but hollow. Freedom, but imprisonment. Life eternal, but only in the cold, sophisticated patterns of flux capacitors and engrammatic ghosts. Defeating the C'tan was mere pressing the pause button on galactic agony, while condemning his people to a timeless torture of perfect numbness. That perfect metal finger traced the stonework hewn by dead worlds. His survey lenses noted parsecs of silent celestial battlefields. The cost wasn't galactic ruin that was history, inevitable debris of such primordial contention. The unbearable truth was the betrayal of the promise itself. That which they sought as salvation, the ascent beyond vulnerable flesh, proved the ultimate betrayal of what made existence significant. The Great Sleep wasn't strategy. It was an act of profound existential mercy prescribed by a despairing physician king. There is no purpose here, only dust following dust. Stir not, consume not time. We will bury ourselves, across countless tomb worlds, deep beneath surfaces once screaming with the energies of ambition and fear alike, began the quiet apotheosis of will. Under obtuse geometries of stone and phased energy fields, uncountable Necron legions moved like mandibular automatons towards their assigned crypts. The Great Sleep protocols cycled in flashes of cold light, facilitated by cryptechs whose own intellects flickered uncertainly before the sheer purposelessness of such oblivion. The Hyrotech phalanxes marched without murmur into stasis vaults that sealed with glacial finality. Technoscarab swarms capped the darkness with entombing rock. Sherk walked endless passages as these unprecedented graves were prepared. Hereditary legions whose sigils once burned with fierce organic pride lost their luster. His presence commanded obedience, yet the Prince Gallows' proud poise or Xandrek's rousing cyberspirit lay inert. Machines obeying machines, his strategic masterpiece became tableau implying death without cessation. The vast emptiness at Sherk's core pulsed heavier than galactic mass itself, sacrificed as immortal hostages to strangle cravings of gods themselves, but salvation now synonymous with damnation. Perhaps deservedly so, his own choice, chosen knowing much, but not knowing the bleak sterility of poisoned infinite, as interfaces completed final encryption levels. Eyed world chambers blackened innards choked with immobile warriors. Silent King realized he is no liberator. He delivered them from chains to a vast communal tomb, himself included. There remains only this bitter finale before endless quietus. Seek not meaning here. Sleep. Let centuries beyond calculus flow. Eyes shut in cold calculation turn worldark now. The last machines sealing tombs echo with muted percussions like dying system warnings against tyrannical universitime. Forgive the silence, forgotten island in void. It seems the stars can remember even how oblivion seeks rest. Zarak, the Silent King, burdened by guilt too crushing to escape, understood the great sleep he had imposed on his people was a pause, not an ending. Millions of years hence, an epoch measured by the slow drift of stars themselves, the Necrons would inevitably stir from their metal slumber, and upon that awakening, they would need a hand to guide them into a terrifying new galaxy he could scarcely envision. Yet Zarak knew, with a certainty as cold and unyielding as the living metal encasing his essence, that the hand could not be his. The weight of his colossal sin, the irreversible choice he had made in bargaining away their very souls to the star gods known as the Cetan, pressed upon him with an agonizing gravity he could no longer bear. The thought of standing before his people as they awoke to their hollow immortality, being stripped of everything that defined life, feeling, memory, the capacity for loss was an abyss his spirit could not contemplate. And so Zarak made his final, irrevocable decree, not of cowardice fleeing responsibility, but as the ultimate act of penance. He would exile himself utterly. He would vanish alone into the lightless immensity of the void, leaving behind the empire forged in desperation and tragedy. He had led them into this eternal purgatory of soulless metal. He could not stay to witness the slow, inevitable decay of what they had become when their silent tombs yawned open once more. He would become a wanderer amidst the indifferent stars, a solitary and unmourned figure, permanently shackled by the consequences of his monumental decisions, carrying the unbearable silence within him like a shroud. With the last of the vast tomb complexes sealed shut beneath alien sands and the legions of automatons arranged within their humming stasis chambers, Zarak departed the silent heart of his dead empire. He offered no farewell, for there existed none to receive it. The Necron populace lay frozen in hibernation, minds entombed. They did not dream within their cold caskets, had no memory of the mortal lives ghastly stolen, would feel no absence paling their hollow existence. The very concept of yearning for something lost was as alien to them now as the fragile warmth of flesh. Zarak the Silent King, his resolve absolute and his soul a void, simply turned his back on everything and stepped into the enveloping darkness of the interstellar gulfs, abandoning throne and people as the final consequence of his rule. The galaxy, in the echoing absence of his departure and the entombment of the Necrontyr forever, seemed to breathe a sigh of profound relief, sinking into a fragile, superficial quiet. The myriad tomb worlds, scattered like dark seeds beneath the dunes of 1,000 deserted planets, lay utterly dormant, armies of living metal submerged in profound stasis, waiting only for the distant, predestined hour of their resurrection, a dread mechanical spring coiled beneath the skin of reality. Millions of years loomed before that awakening, epochs during which the younger races of the stars would bloom and wither entirely ignorant of the ancient, terrible power lying catatonic just below the crust of worlds they claimed for their own fleeting dominions. But the Necrons harbored no concern over the ignorance of transient beings. They possessed the ultimate advantage, the infinite currency of eternity itself. Time was their constant companion. The stars above burned on in their fathomless expanses, icy and distant, making no comment on the cycles below, just as they always had since the galaxy's fiery dawn. Time itself, that relentless, pitiless river, continued its indifferent flow, eternal and boundless, carrying all things inexorably forward. Civilizations ignited with ephemeral brilliance, flared brightly amidst the tapestry of creation like supernovae, then dissolved into dust and forgotten myths. Worlds coalesced from stellar nebulae, nurtured fragile life amongst chaos, then crumbled into barren rock or dissolved in stellar collisions. Yet concealed within the perpetual twilight of dead corners, forgotten beneath the drifting, suffocating sands of planets discarded by history, slumbered entities older than most of these new empires, venerable even to the majority of the stars who watched them. Deeper than any simple subterranean cavern, embedded within the shielded depths of tomb worlds scattered with patient malice throughout the galactic spiral, the Necrons maintained their profound, soundless suspension. It was a sleep devoid of dreams, stripped of the neurochemical sparks of hope or fear, utterly without conscious thought. For millions upon millions of years, they remained motionless, preserved by arcane energies, their immense legions locked within vast, icy stasis chambers. Each chamber housed a construct of necrodermis, a shell of terrible sophistication, reflecting the dim light like polished obsidian, yet within each resided the lost mind of a creature that had once known the beating heart, the coursing blood, the anguish and joy that defined mortality, beings who had not always been these changeling automatons. They were once the Necrontyr, a species of modest flesh perpetually haunted by the specter of early death, ravaged by stellar poisons from their weeping sun, torment driving them towards a desperate, all-consuming quest for the impossible, true immortality. But that distant past was buried deep, layered over by eons of cold metal sleep long before they encountered the cryptic, malevolent Cetan ravenous for the energies of life, long before the horrifying ritual of biotransference was enacted, a process that flensed them of their very souls, their identities, their passions, and forged them anew as immortal, consciousness-bound machines. Now the Necrons rested interred beneath kilometers of stone and dust, their undying bodies of adaptive necrodermis unwavering, impervious to decay, their minds held silent within the unbreachable stillness of the great cataleptic sleep. In the profound, crushing hush of their womb-like tombs, not even the vibration of a collapsing mountain could rouse them. No cosmic tempest could disturb their ancient dormancy. They were suspended, ageless passengers trapped in the eternal clockwork procession of the cosmos, waiting only for the distant chime that would signal their reanimation. Thus, the galaxy rolled forward, blessedly unaware of the colossal, slumbering while resting just beyond the grasp of its inhabitants' perception. In the vast sweep of time since the Necrons sealed their civilizations beneath the skin of worlds, the celestial stage had irrevocably shifted. The Old Ones, their primordial adversaries in the soul-shattering war in heaven, were dust and vanished echoes, their interstellar empires fragmented into cosmic debris whirling aimlessly through the void, their intricate creations abandoned. Their culminating masterstrokes, the sentient younger races fostered as weapons in that eon-spanning conflict, endured some thriving like virulent weeds, others clinging to survival by the barest thread. Most notable among these remnants were the Eldar, once the undisputed crown jewel of the Old Ones' genetic design, beings of sublime grace and unparalleled psychic resonance whose dominion had bridged the stars. Yet even the Eldar, for all their inherited might and ancient wisdom, had succumbed to a creeping existential decay. Their empire imploded beneath the suffocating weight of its own towering decadence, sliding inexorably into decline. Other powers ascended to fill the silence left by the Old Ones' eradication. The Imperium of Man emerged, a brutal, monolithic empire sprawling across the light years, clumsily forged and perpetually sustained on the broken backs and exploited faith of countless billions. Its dominion now smothered vast swathes of the galaxy, yet for all its fearsome fleets prowling the void, and its legions of faceless warriors staining a million battlefields red, the Imperium remained almost fatally naive about the true horrors buried within its claimed territories. They plotted the movements of the scattered Eldar corsairs, They grappled perpetually with the inexhaustible orc hordes. They dreaded the implacable advance of the ravening Tyrannid hive fleets descending from the lightless voids between galaxies. But concerning the ancient Necrons, their knowledge was shockingly scant, often dismissing their tomb complexes as merely archaic ruins emptied of all meaning by history's relentless erosion, their lethal potential erased from the collective memory of sentient beings, forgotten chapters in a cosmic narrative too enormous to comprehend. Millions of patient years the Necrons endured within their soundless sanctuaries, worlds untouched by weathering time, secrets guarded by the indifference of ages. Civilizations blossomed above them in brief, feverish pulses and returned to the silence of obliteration, yet the Necrons persisted, immutable and indestructible, laughing silently at entropy's futile attempts. The galaxy above them had relegated them to myth, to dusty whispers shared in the darkest corners by scholars ignored as madmen, consigned them to the dustbin of prehistory. But the Necrons could not forget the galaxy they once ruled and would rule once more. Energy flickered dimly within the core processors of Necron lords even in deepest stasis, their intellects unimpaired by the eons, calculating coldly and deliberately, utterly divorced from any anchor of mortal emotion or trivial passion. They had endured the slow passage of deep time, their programming intact, their purpose delayed but never derailed. Yet Zarek, ever the architect of their eternity, had engineered their hibernation to endure beyond the reasonable. They would sleep longer still, waiting for a signal that had not yet resonated across the light years. Zarek, the silent king irrefutably bound to their destiny, had acted as the architect of their apotheosis into metal and silence. It was his voice that convinced the dynasties to embrace the biotransference. It was his eyes that witnessed firsthand the horrific visceral aftermath of that Faustian pact, the agonized writhing, the spiritual vacuum left in the wake of soul-devouring entities, the terrible emptiness exchanged for unyielding metal bodies. The Citan bestowed upon the Necrontyr the gilded cage of eternal existence, but the cruel price extracted was everything else: their fundamental spark, their unique identities, their liberty to choose any path but this relentless, hollow undeath. Thus, condemned by his own monumental leadership, Zarek guided his people not into a final capitulation, but into the profound stillness of the Great Sleep, a strategic retreat orchestrated as an act of preservation, a suspension state chosen for survival. His brilliant, tormented mind grasped the inevitable temporal shifts. He anticipated the future galaxy beyond the long night of their suspension, foreseeing the decline of the old ones, the usurpation by nascent powers, their eventual rise and predictable, chaotic fall. And he foresaw with absolute conviction that one inevitable distant dawn, the stars themselves would align, whispering the critical hour for the Necrons to awaken once more, step from their sarcophagi, and reclaim their shattered dominion amongst the constellations. Clearly, though, that prophesied moment was not yet upon the galaxy. Patient as the bedrock of worlds, the Necrons maintained their entombment beneath remote, forgotten landscapes, their necropoli undisturbed by the blaring wars and petty ambition raging across the galactic disk. This was a slumber measured not in millennia, but in vast geological epochs, tectonically slow eons, and in that colossal span, the galaxy forgot. The colossal funerary cities, once the gleaming, terrifying power centers of the infinite empire, became suffocated by accumulating sediment, buried entirely beneath entombing strata. Ancient tomb portals were sealed not by conscious effort, but by the ceaseless, patient drift of continents over bedrock. Civilization evolved, decayed, was replaced. Galactic history surged forward in turbulent waves and myriad thrashing currents, and the Necrons dwindled in collective memory to obscure folklore, a chilling myth occasionally recounted and dismissed as impossible fantasy by those far removed from the truths buried beneath their feet with the gravity of dead suns. Yet the Necrons cultivated an unnatural patience born of immortality. Time truly held no dominion over them. Hidden below the unsuspecting surface of myriad planets humming with ephemeral life above, the tomb complexes remained meticulously preserved, their intricate mechanisms humming barely perceptibly, sustaining the torpor of the slumbering legions. The tomb worlds resonated not with life, but with a profound, echoing stillness. The inhabitants lay utterly frozen, immobile statues forged not of stone, but of nightmare science. Yet death could not claim them. They existed beyond such mortal concepts, enthralled by eternity, their undying metal shells impervious and unchanging against the backdrop of a universe slowly crumbling into thermodynamic stasis. So they maintained their watchful dormancy, and as they preserved themselves against the flow of deep time, the galaxy outside descended inevitably into escalating disorder. The feudal empire of 10,000 worlds known as the Imperium of Man, despite its staggering size and martial fanaticism, found itself perpetually besieged, drowning beneath relentless assaults from myriad directions. The Eldar, oceans of grief slowly devouring their souls, witnessed their former magnificent Imperium degenerate into scattered craftworlds like frail arcs adrift in a cosmic storm, endlessly grieving their lost glory. Orcs rampaged unchecked across the stars in great barbarian waves seeking nothing but violent exertion. And the Tyranids, a cosmic plague originating in the ghastly dark between the galactic filaments, advanced slowly yet utterly inexorably, consuming entire planetary ecosystems, leaving only barren husks drained of biomass. It was a galaxy paralyzed by escalating chaos, teetering precariously on the irreversible brink of implosion, a maelstrom feeding upon endless conflict. Yet the Necrons, locked within their impenetrable metallic dream, remained unmoved, untouched by the tempestuous turmoil engulfing the lesser species playing their tragic games far above their citadels of hibernation. This burgeoning chaos signified nothing new to their ancient battle processors. They had overseen the grim cadence of empires rising blindingly bright before imploding into supernova ashes countless times across the fathomless gulf of their history. The inevitable outcome of the struggle above was categorically unimportant: flame out or endure for another blink in eternity. It signified nothing profound to their cold logic. They knew, to the core of their algorithms, the essential, pitiless truth. No matter the victor in the current mad scramble staining segments of the galaxy, or if all life above succumbed beneath the Tyranid shadow or drowned in psychic cataclysm triggered by escalating desperation, they, the Necrons, would endure. These noisy, conflict-driven younger races embodied ephemeral concepts. Their lifespans were cosmic heartbeats, their struggles profoundly insignificant on the scale of galactic ages. They were merely turbulent eddies on the surface of an infinite cosmic ocean. The Necrons, in stark, chilling contrast, were the deep water itself, eternal, infinite, requiring nothing and fearing nothing save perhaps the silent void within them. Their existence stretched forward into the limitless, sonorous eternity of the universe, entirely unaffected by the trivial politics and anguished prayers vibrating uselessly on faraway worlds. And yet, entwined with this immortality was an implacable knowledge. Their time upon the galactic stage would inevitably return. Zarek himself, the exiled architect walking alone through the endless dark, though his physical form had vanished from recorded history perhaps millions of years prior, had meticulously foreseen its pattern etched within the star currents and whispered it across the void. This period of suspended animation was finite. The great sleep was never ordained to clutch them forever within its silent embrace. One pivotal hour, incalculably distant yet guaranteed by the relentless gears of cosmic chronology, a final threshold would be crossed, an ancient, buried signal beam silently activated somewhere in the light-devouring void. Then the indomitable tomb worlds would groan back into rampant, deafening life-lidless sensors flickering online simultaneously like baleful newborn stars, ancient engines too long silent screaming into horrifying activation, vaulted portals created by alien geometries grinding open with the awful groan of worlds splitting. And the legions would arise, numberless ranks of mechanical horrors clawing free from their sandy graves, pristine scarabs buzzing into choked skies, then a galaxy that dared to forget, that worshipped fragile gods of war and hope splintered by their own petty differences, would tremble to its very molten core beneath the march of resurrected nightmare. For this moment, however, swirling within this seemingly permanent now of rage and war, the existing galactic powers remained willfully ignorant, perilously unaware of the truly ancient and ineffably potent threat merely sleeping beneath their hive cities, and under their fertile farmlands the Necrons, gleaming faintly in the oppressive darkness of their shielded crypts, their collective consciousness only existing as potential within dormant logic circuits, slept perpetually on, unchanging, enduring. And waiting without complaint, the monumental civilizations of Menildil and Xenos above might have misplaced their ancient horror, erased the Necron peril from their hastily scribbled star charts consumed immediately within prowling red bureaucracies. But the Necrons themselves, with memory banks extending back to the catastrophic birth throes of the cosmos, had categorically, imperatively, horrifically not forgotten the galaxy they haunted. They simply awaited their summons from the abyss, silently counting down every spiraling orbit towards inevitable resurgence. And so the distant stars continued their silent burning, just as they had before life crawled from ocean slime onto land. The cosmic wheel slowly turned, bringing death to stars and birth to new nebulae. Empires built proudly upon foundations, wet with mortal blood, inevitably toppled, shading forgotten histories beneath their disintegrating monuments. And the Necrons, eternal architects of destiny who had witnessed the birth and death of gods, symbiotically united to time itself, maintained their rigid vigil in the echoing void, waiting without breathing, feeling only the imperative necessity encoded within their cores to awaken when called. The silence was their patient certainty, and it permeated the